What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back, with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto woke up shirtless, surrounded by blushing women in his apartments? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. Sighing quietly as he closed his eyes, Naruto calmly stalked down the bridge with purpose as his fellow male teammate, Uchiha Sasake, remained on the defensive against the Demon Brothers while Haruno Sakura, the lone female member of Team 7, was engaged in combat with Haku and Hitaki. Kakashi was left to deal with Zabuza. Tazuna, left unguarded by the others, was frozen in place by the immense killing intent that choked the very air he breathed. Everything had been one bad idea after another ever since Sasake demanded a higher-ranking mission. Why couldn't the damn Brad just relax and take it easy for a little while? Standing at 6 feet 2 inches, 18-year-old Naruto had shaggy dark crimson hair pulled back in a ponytail that reached down to the middle of his back while his chin-length bangs framed his face. Cold ruby-red irises floating in pools of obsidian while black slit pupils sat in their cores. A defined and lean muscular physique, and sun-tanned skin bearing numerous scars of various size and shape. A set of 3 thin and jagged black lines decorated either of his cheeks, marks he possessed since birth. Like usual, he was dressed in only a pair of baggy black and dark red camouflage pants tucked into black knee-high combat boots. A black sleeveless turtleneck with mesh sleeves that reached down to his elbows. A pair of black elbow-length fingerless gloves on his hands with a spiked strip of dark metal running across his knuckles. Dark red Enbu-style bracers strapped to his forearms with an additional plate to cover the back of his hands. A short length of thin chain hung from his belt at his left hip with a metal pendant hanging from it that was made of a single metal ring with an upside-down triangle set inside of it, while a tassel of dark crimson string hung from either side of the pendant with a black feather tied to the end of each of the tassels, and his Konoha Hite tied around his neck on a strip of dark red cloth. Attached to his belt at either hip was a dark crimson satchel-like pouch that reached down to just above his knees with black straps wrapping around his thighs to hold them in place, while 4 dark crimson weapon pouches lined the back of his waist. Looking at the Demon Brothers assaulting his arrogant teammate, the red-haired teen sighed once more before withdrawing his hands from his pockets and stepping between them. Mizu was the first to notice Naruto's sudden presence, but was unable to alert his twin brother when Naruto swiftly jabbed the rogue in the throat with his left hand, the knuckle spikes punching through Mizu's flesh and causing his blood to spurt out while the masked Kiri-nuke-nin clutched at his neck with fear. Unable to scream, Mizu suffered from a right backhand from Naruto, making him stumble and turn around slightly. Wrapping his left arm around the man's neck and gripping his chin with his right hand, Naruto paused for a moment and glanced to the side, idly noticing that Sasake was still fending off Guzu, who was just starting to take notice that his brother was missing. Crack! With a sharp jerk, Naruto broke Mizu's neck before spinning around and kicking Guzu in the chest, knocking him back a little just in time for the claws on his right hand to sail harmlessly mere centimeters in front of Sasake's face, who could only watch the metal sheaths slice through the air in front of him with his Sharingan eyes. Taking a few steps closer, Naruto spun around before slamming his booted heel into the side of Guzu's right shoulder, snapping the bone at the joint and fracturing the socket itself. Aarrghh! The sole remaining sibling of the Demon Brothers cried out, clutching his shoulder with his left hand. Before he could recompose himself or retaliate, Naruto struck again, swinging his left fist around and striking the side of Guzu's head with a backhand that ripped a series of jagged gashes into his scalp from his knuckle spikes. Naruto spun with the momentum and struck the shinobi with a right hook, sending his newly scratched metal rebreather face mask skidding across the ground while moving in closer, slamming his left elbow into the side of Guzu's neck to stun him for a few seconds. Wrapping his left arm around the back of Guzu's neck and bending him forward, Naruto drove his left knee into the rogue's chest to keep him from fighting back before jerking his arm with a sharp twist, snapping the neck of the second member of the Demon Brothers. Wah! What the hell? Sasake hissed out with shock and disbelief rather than anger or jealousy as his Sharingan eyes faded away back to his original coal-black irises. Naruto was always declining spars and taijutsu training, leaving everyone to believe he simply refused to use taijutsu for some strange reason. Now that he had seen what Naruto could actually do in a fight, Sasake didn't know whether he was anxious to fight the redhead or, dare he admit, afraid. What startled him even more was the fact that every move was perfectly executed without any wasted energy or even a single opening in his stance. Not to mention the fact it was infinitely brutal. Since when could you fight like that? Standing at 5 feet 11 inches, 16-year-old Uchiha Sasake was dressed in a black skin-tight long-sleeved top, a black cloth face mask pulled up over his nose, white embu-styled bracers on his forearms with white armored plates covering the back of his hands, baggy black pants with white cloth wrapped around his legs from his knees down to his ankles, white embu-styled guards strapped to his shins, black closed-toe shinobi sandals on his feet, a set of white embu-styled body armor covering his torso with a black hood attached to the raised armored collar and pulled up over his head while the Uchiha symbol decorated the back of his armor. A belt of white armor plates around his waist with a knee-length half-cloak of black cloth hanging from it and a length of white cloth hanging down to his knees from the buckle in the front, and a konoha hite tied around his neck on a band of black cloth. Strapped to either thigh was a pair of kunai holsters, a set of 4 weapon pouches attached to his belt behind his waist, a number of hidden spring-loaded kunai launchers built into the underside of his bracers, a couple more kunai hidden in his shin guards, and 2 more pairs of kunai holsters stashed horizontally under his body armor in the back along his lower back. I've always been able to fight like that. It's the Sandame who forbid me from fighting with comrades since he knows I'll kill anyone without hesitation. Naruto remarked as he glanced at Sasake over his shoulder, the look in his strange eyes startling the Uchiha. His eyes were cold and void of emotion, giving Sasake the feeling of his soul being devoured by the empty pits. Looking forward once more without another word, Naruto disappeared back into the mist before Sasake could question him further. Without hesitation, Naruto headed towards the area Sakura and Haku were fighting, only to come to a halt a short distance away from the two in question, his eyes slowly narrowing with something akin to anger. Sakura, standing at about 5 feet 4 inches, 16-year-old Haruno Sakura had long cherry blossom pink hair pulled back into a thick braid that reached down to the small of her back, hypnotizing emerald green eyes, and light cream-colored skin. She was wearing a pair of baggy dark crimson capri pants, a dark red midriff-bearing top stretched tight across her C-cup bust with a white ring in the center of her upper back while a low-cut collar dipped down to reveal a decent amount of her cleavage, the broad white cuffs of her baggy dark crimson sleeves hanging a few inches past her fingertips while slender bands of white-colored leather secured them to her arms just above her elbows, a sleeveless fishnet top under her shirt, black sandals on her feet, 2 pouches strapped to either thigh with one of each pair being filled with kunai or senbon, a medical bag set across her lower back, a weapon pouch on either side of her medical bag, and a white sash wrapped around her waist with one end hanging down to her knees in the front. Tied around her neck on a band of dark crimson cloth was her konoha hite. Haku muttered as she turned to face the red-haired male, the senbon-riddled body of Sakura lying at her feet. Naruto simply stared down at his fallen teammate, his normally apathetic eyes suddenly showing signs of the smoldering embers that was his heart, the only visible sign of him showing any sort of emotion towards Sakura's apparent demise. He had never admitted it to anyone and often tried to lie to himself about his feelings, but Naruto had become attached to the intelligent and strong-willed young woman. To see her in such a state, his eyes slowly shifted from Sakura to the masked kunoichi, narrowing slightly. "You will pay for that," Naruto hissed coldly through clenched teeth as his muscles tensed, the only warning sign given. Blurring with speed, Naruto appeared in front of Haku and buried his fist in her stomach, doubling her over and lifting her off the ground with the power put behind the blow. Suspended by the fist, Haku instinctively knew that it was only the beginning. Moving too quick for the unaided eye to track, Naruto retracted his hand, spun around on his left foot while swinging his right leg up, and slammed the heel of his boot down on Haku's back, his heel connecting between her shoulders. Crying out in pain as she was smashed into the stone floor, Haku found herself paralyzed with agony, her face bloodied from her broken nose as her mask slid across the ground. Just as her body bounced off the ground from the impact, Naruto backflipped in place, kicking Haku in the face with his right foot. The impact was powerful enough to cause a resounding clap of sound to echo through the mist as the kunoichi was kicked back up onto her feet. Not even missing a beat, Naruto swung his left leg out to the side before his right foot could touch back down, but once it did, Naruto's shin made contact with the middle of Haku's ribs and sent the now unmasked young woman flying off to the side. Arg! Haku cried out in even more pain as she slammed into the stone railing that ran along either side of the bridge, a small section being cracked and chipped by the impact. Going limp and falling to the ground, Haku found herself unable to force her body to move as she watched Naruto slowly walk over to her, a small vicious smirk forming on his lips. Her eyes remained locked on his 4 ivory fangs, a cold sweat forming all over her body. "You killed her," Naruto muttered quietly as he crouched down halfway to her for a moment, picking up her mask with his left hand and examining it for a moment. Slipping it into the satchel pouch at his left hip, Naruto continued on his way before crouching down once more, this time reaching down and grabbing Haku by the neck before lifting her into a sitting position with his hand still wrapped around her throat, staring into her eyes as he contemplated what to actually do with her. At that moment, Haku found herself feeling truly afraid for her life for the first time, and it wasn't because of the promise of death, it was the man's eyes. When he spoke, his voice was quiet and as sharp as any blade, his words dripping with a venomous rage. "You killed her, and now, I'm going to kill you. You should feel special. I don't normally feed in the presence of others." "URK." Haku choked out as her eyes widened greatly, the redhead's fangs buried in the side of her neck. A feeling of utter cold developed around the bite mark before it began to spread throughout her entire body, her vision going dark within seconds. Pulling back from her and a little breathless, Naruto couldn't stop the grin from forming on his bloodied face. Wiping the blood from his mouth and chin with his right hand, Naruto parted Haku's robes with his left hand before painting a circle on her chest with an upside-down triangle inside of it, using her blood for it. "Jujutsu. Shite Gujin Ketsueki Shoji," Naruto stated calmly as he formed a single hand seal with his right hand while holding his left hand over the mark. Instantly, his and Haku's skin turned pitch black as white stylized skeletal markings decorated their blackened flesh. Without waiting another moment, Naruto and his new puppet stood up simultaneously and took off down the bridge. It took only a moment to locate Kakashi and Zabuza, and after distinguishing them from one another, Naruto mentally commanded his new puppet to aid him in attacking Zabuza for a moment. "What the Haku? What the hell is going on?" Zabuza remarked, blocking Haku's kick, only to have a boot impact the back of his head while he was distracted. Rolling forward and springing back to his feet, Zabuza raised Kabikari just in time to block the spiked fist with the flat side of his Zanbatsu, but he couldn't react in time when his attacker kicked him in the side of his head again, but the Chunin managed to wrap an arm around the limb, lifting Kabikari with his free hand to slay the figure. Letting the blade drop, Zabuza was shocked to find the spiked knuckle plate of Naruto's other glove blocking the Zanbatsu's cutting edge, a malicious fanged grin on the redhead's face. Zabuza also took notice that Naruto's skin was black and white just like Haku's. "Try again, Buza," Naruto taunted before kicking the man's left knee in with his free foot, dislocating and destroying the joint, only for Zabuza to have replaced himself with a Mizu Bunshin at the last second. Raising his arms and crossing them over his head as he turned around while regaining his footing, Naruto blocked Kabikiri's blade, his grin still in place. Naruto's grin suddenly became a slight frown of confusion while his eyes widened slightly when a second Zabuza appeared behind him, swinging Kabikiri in a horizontal slash. Uh-oh. A moment later, the blade cleaved through his spine, gliding through the flesh of his lower abdomen before slicing through the Mizu Bunshin Zabuza had used to distract Naruto. Gritting his teeth out of sheer malice towards the redhead for somehow desecrating Haku's precious corpse with some kind of kinjutsu, Zabuza stared down at the two halves that had once been whole. Then he noticed something. Naruto's left eyebrow, it was twitching. "Sanuva bitch. That fucking hurts, asshole." Naruto suddenly roared at the man, honestly scaring Zabuza greatly, not knowing that one of Zabuza's greatest fears was a fear of the undead, zombies, simply put. Then again, such fear was to be expected when the bisected corpse lying on the ground one moment started screaming and cursing at him the next. Tendrils of crimson chakra reached out from the bloody flesh and latched onto the opposite half of his body, quickly pulling them back together and allowing his extremely powerful healing factor to seal the wound and recombine both halves while every last drop of his spilled blood was pulled back into his body. Standing up, Naruto ripped his ruined mesh top off and tossed the scraps to the side before cracking his neck. "You ruined my favorite shirt, too. Wah. What the fuck is going on here?" Zabuza howled, only making Naruto look at him quizzically before cackling madly, having commanded Haku to keep Kakashi from interrupting. So long as they were under his control, his corpse puppets had the same healing factor as himself, making them truly powerful weapons in their own right. Ha ha ha. Welcome to my fucked up and twisted world, Momochi. Naruto howled as he suddenly shot forward, smashing his head into Zabuza's face and knocking him out. Zabuza's world went black. HMPH. Zabuza stirred with a groan before he was jarred awake by the memories of the creepy red head that wouldn't die. He found himself gagged and tied up, a length of rope running from his bound ankles to a large rock set off to the side. They were at the incomplete end of the bridge and it was about midday, probably the day after the incident on the bridge. That's when he was smacked across the side of his head as Naruto entered his line of sight, having returned back to normal. Grinning madly, Naruto leaned back against the wall and started cleaning under his nails with the tip of a kunai. Accidentally slicing through his pinky, though, Naruto's mood darkened in an instant. His eyes became cold and apathetic as he watched rivulets of blood trickle from the tip of his finger, only for the flesh to stitch itself back together. Did I ever tell you what the definition of insanity is? Insanity is doing the exact same fucking thing over and over again, expecting shit to change. Naruto began as he started twirling the knife around in his hand, his sentences broken with momentary pauses, almost as if he were searching for the needed words or struggling to describe what he was thinking in a way someone else might understand. That, and he was rambling almost senselessly. That is crazy, but the first time somebody told me that, I dunno, I thought they were bullshitting me, so bam, I stabbed him. The thing is, okay, he was right. And then I started seeing. Everywhere I looked, all these fucking pricks. Everywhere I looked, doing the exact same fucking thing. Over and over and over and over again thinking. This time, it's going to be different. No, 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 please. This time it's going to be different. Zabuza stayed silent as he stared at the redhead with defiant eyes, something that was obviously bothering Naruto as he pushed off from the wall and started pacing anxiously as he talked. Getting fed up with it, Naruto decided to address the apparent issue. I am sorry, I don't like the way you are looking at me. Okay, do you have a fucking problem in your head? Do you think I'm bullshitting you? Do you think I'm lying? Naruto started talking, getting progressively louder and more rabid in tone. He then brandished the kunai in his hand and swung it, cutting a thin and shallow gash across Zabuza's forehead. Fuck you, okay? Fuck you. NGH. As Zabuza let out a brief, muffled cry of pain, Naruto forced himself to take a deep breath and calm down. As he did, he sheathed his blade and stepped back. I'm gonna chill, brother. I'm gonna chill. The thing is. Alright. The thing is, you were killed once already. And it's not like I am fucking crazy. It's okay, it's water under the bridge. Naruto responded before putting his right foot on the rock and giving Zabuza a blank, emotionless stare. Zabuza's eyes widened with fear as he realized what was about to happen. Did I ever tell you the definition of insanity? MMMMFF. Zabuza tried screaming through the gag as the rock was kicked over the edge, quickly pulling the rope taut. Futilely clawing at the stone floor, Zabuza was pulled over the edge, plummeting to the water as he stared up at Naruto, who stared down at him blankly up until the man disappeared into the dark, cool depths of the strait separating wave country from fire country. Stay dead this time, will ya? Naruto muttered before turning around and walking back down the bridge, whistling a dark tune as he stuffed his hands in his pockets. As he passed by the large blood stain that scarred the bridge, Naruto recalled the glorious slaughter he wrought upon Gato and his henchmen after knocking Zabuza out and having a shadow clone leave with the man's body to hide him for a little while. He then recalled when he first came to worship his lord, Jashin. At the time, he had been only 5, was it? He no longer cared and thus, he no longer remembered properly. Anyways, he had stumbled across an old hideout of some sort while running from another mob that had been fully intent on killing him that night. There, he found a large scroll containing a handful of kenjutsu techniques, including the one that turned him immortal at the cost of having to drink blood kind of like a vampire to keep his strength up instead of eating food like a normal person, the pendant at his hip, and a new form of ninjutsu. Jujutsu, which was also known as sorcery, black magic, and voodoo to name a few. Jujutsu just sounded better to him, though. He never regretted performing the kenjutsu and what he told Zabuza about the definition of insanity. He was telling the truth. He had actually been in Zabuza's position at the time he had performed the kenjutsu, too. Well, kind of. The man that tried to end Naruto's life that night gave him the same monologue before stabbing him in the chest and turning to walk away. However, not wanting to die, Naruto pulled the large kitchen knife from his chest and formed the hand seals needed for the kenjutsu, stabbed the man in the leg before he could react, and licked the man's blood from the blade. That was all it took. Unlike what the Jashinist cultists believe, there was no actual god called Jashin and there was no need to sacrifice in his name. Jashin was actually the creator of the kenjutsu used for their immortality and the first of them to come about. However, the man did start the cult, brainwashing his followers and making them believe he was a god. It wasn't until about a decade later that he mysteriously disappeared, which only proved to turn him into a martyr amongst the Jashinists back then. As time went on, the number of cultists gradually began to dwindle until one of them discovered the scroll containing Jashin's kenjutsu, thus becoming the first, immortal acolyte of Jashin. That was a long time ago, though, and thus, unimportant to him. The truth was that the person that used the kenjutsu simply needed to make sure they either drank the blood of someone once a month, at minimum, or came into direct contact with a certain amount of the crimson liquid and letting it soak into their skin. All other acolytes tended to sacrifice, thus coming into contact with copious amounts of blood. However, it wasn't as effective as actually consuming that blood. Even if one were to completely submerge themselves in blood, absorbing it through the skin would only last about a week at the most, while draining a single average adult person dry of blood would last the acolyte almost a full month. Normally, the kenjutsu would stop the body from aging, but Naruto had discovered that if he fed primarily on animal blood, he continued to age normally without losing his immortality, but he was left slightly weaker than what he would normally be at. Then again, everything came at a price. Naruto? Kakashi asked from off to the side, breaking Naruto from his thoughts and making him realize he was already at Tazuna's home. Cocking an eyebrow and looking at the Chunin, Naruto stopped in his tracks with a flat look on his face. He knew this would happen. The Chunin was going to question him about his abilities and his actions back on the bridge. Did you make sure he was dead? Huh? Naruto responded dumbly, blinking a few times out of confusion. Of all things, how did he know about that? Did you make sure Zabuza was dead before you left? Kakashi asked again, but Naruto still seemed to be confused as to how the Chunin knew about it. I'm a Chunin for a reason, Naruto. One of the things I'm best at is tracking. Just before Gato arrived, I noticed that yours and Zabuza's scents went away from the bridge even though you yourself never left. That brings another question to mind. Where did you learn the shadow clone technique? First question first. No, but I put a chakra suppression seal on him and took all of his pointy objects before you woke up. Also, the rope I used has steel wire in it, meaning he can't cut through it anyways. Besides, the knot I used makes the bindings pull tighter the more he fights. He'll drown before he can escape. Naruto answered, listing off the precautions he had taken. As for the second? Weasel. You mean? Kakashi trailed off, receiving a nod from Naruto. It was unwise to mention Itachi's name around Sasake. When? Well, the night before that night, he left me a scroll with a note that said not to open until I graduated from the academy. I can only imagine why. Naruto responded before looking up at the sky. Because of the kenjutsu I had performed on myself combined with my tenant, my chakra control was fucked up, causing me to fail twice due to being unable to perform the Bunshin technique. I got pissed off, opened the scroll, and discovered it was the Kage Bunshin. I then proceeded to learn and master it in a single night because I needed to vent quite a bit of anger. That same night, I spotted Mizuki and, well, you know the rest. Yes, I do. Kakashi muttered in reply, cringing slightly at the memory. After catching up to Mizuki, Naruto had learned of his burden the Kyuubi no Kitsune. The Chunin had thought it would affect Naruto and give him an opening to kill the brat. What he didn't realize was that Naruto was simply lost in thought, and even after having a giant shuriken embedded in his chest, Naruto was still alive, due to the kenjutsu he had performed on himself when he was a kid. After that, Naruto had started laughing maniacally, which had been heard for a great distance as it cut through the night air. Which was shortly followed by a blood-chilling wail of agony that was Mizuki's prolonged death rattle. Mizuki was later found by Anbu after Naruto returned the forbidden scroll of sealing, but the man wasn't in one piece. His skin and flesh had been flayed and torn from his bones, his blood painting everything around his remains within a 10-foot radius. Naruto had painted the Jashinist symbol on Mizuki's skull for some reason, never mentioning its purpose. Kakashi, who had been amongst the Anbu present, was only one of several to purge the contents of their stomach at the sight. Good times. Well, I'm going hunting. Naruto muttered with a slight grin before stating, turning on his heel and walking into the forest, leaving Kakashi to shiver, still haunted by the horrifying image. Whistling another dark tune with his hands in his pockets, Naruto walked for what seemed like an hour or two before eventually coming to a stop at the edge of a clearing, the hideout Zabuza had been using resting at the other side. Staring up at the suspended structure, Naruto stopped whistling and gained a faint smirk, only to vanish from his spot and reappear inside the building via the open door and a quick burst of chakra-enhanced speed combined with a jump. Walking down one of the short halls, Naruto came to a door and opened it, stepping into the room and shutting the door behind him. Lying on the table in the middle of the empty room was Haku's body, stripped of her clothing and runes painted all across her body in blood. The floor, walls, and ceiling were covered in a massive seal array, also having been done with blood. The main reason most jujutsu techniques were classified as kenjutsu was due to their heavy reliance on blood for the techniques to work. That, and the occasional dead body and/or live sacrifice, though the second varied between animals and human beings depending on the jujutsu being used. Let's get started, shall we? Naruto inquired of no one in particular as he approached Haku's corpse while cracking his knuckles. Using a kunai, Naruto sliced open his left palm and slipped the weapon back into the pouch it came from before rubbing his hands together, coating his hands in his own blood before running through a long string of hand seals. Falling on the final hand seal, Naruto put his hands on the dead body's abdomen, calling out the name of the kenjutsu as a reddish smoke-like energy poured out from his blood-covered hands and into the corpse. Jujutsu. Akuryu Fukatsu no Yokusei. Wa. What the hell just happened? She groaned out quietly, her eyes squeezed shut and body racked with pain. Slowly forcing herself to sit up, she put a hand to her head and groaned again, her head pounding with a migraine. Her eyes snapped open at that thought. Hand? Looking at herself, Kurama discovered that she was no longer in her glorious nine-tailed kitsune form, now having the body of a young human female. She was also lying on a table in the middle of an empty room. What the hell is going on? You're finally awake, A familiar voice inquired from behind her, making Kurama turn around and glare at the person, only to grow light-headed and dizzy from the sudden movement, causing her to lean down and take a moment to recover. A quiet, dark chuckle escaped the person. I wouldn't suggest anything too strenuous. You aren't used to your new body yet. What are you talking about? Kurama rasped out, slowly looking up to find Naruto standing there, leaning back against the wall with his arms crossed over his chest and a fanged smirk on his face. Nodding over to the side, Naruto's smirk only grew. Glancing over to where he had motioned, Kurama saw a full body mirror propped up against the wall. Glancing back at the red-haired human that honestly creeped her out ever since he came across that kenjutsu scroll, Kurama cautiously stood up from the table, taking her time in gaining her balance and stability before walking over to it. Oh my god, she whispered, seeing herself as a human for the first time since the sage had divided the Kyuubi, creating her and the 8 other Biju. She stood at 5 feet 9 inches with waist-length dark auburn red hair, skin the color of light cream that was free of blemish, the same exact eyes as Naruto's, and the kanji for slave staining the flesh of her toned and flat stomach. Her figure was slender, yet voluptuous, bearing broad hips, a slim waist, long legs with muscular thighs, huge and perky plump s that she guessed to be around H-cups, a firm and meaty rump, and full pink lips. Spinning around and glaring at Naruto, Kurama quickly charged Naruto to attack him, only for the slave tattoo to flare up, causing pain to shoot through her body and make her drop to her knees, wrapping her arms around her midsection as she grit her teeth to keep from crying out in agony. "Why you bastard? What did you do to me? I gave you freedom. Limited as it may be, it is freedom, nonetheless," Naruto remarked coldly, glad to see that the slave seal worked properly. While Kurama's spirit inhabited the body that had once belonged to Yuki Haku, the Kyuubi's chakra had been left behind in Naruto's body. Originally, the evil spirit restraining resurrection didn't require the runes that had decorated Haku's corpse, but Naruto didn't want anyone getting suspicious as to why a dead woman was still alive, and applied a set of seals on the body that would change the body to properly match the personality and mental image of the spirit that would inhabit the body, creating an entirely new person altogether. The slave seal was both a symbol of her standing and a control seal to keep her from intending harm on him now that she wasn't contained by the seal that imprisoned her within him. The stronger the feelings of ill intent, the greater the pain she would be forced to endure. "I decided to give you some simple comforts and let you escape the confining prison you had been in previously. Might not exactly be to your liking, but at least it is something." Kurama said nothing as she was covered with a baggy hooded black cloak, but she was grateful nonetheless and clutched it to her frame. That was when she noticed the hand held out to her, causing her to glance up at Naruto. Although her eyes showed defiance and hatred, she couldn't help noticing how nice he was being at the same time. Normally, Naruto would have just dropped the cloak on the ground and walked away, letting her fend for herself. Why are you being nice? Because you're the only one that never left me, that never betrayed me. You're the only one that never hurt me. Not on purpose, at least," Naruto remarked quietly, helping Kurama to her feet after she grabbed onto his hand. Wrapping an arm around her waist to help support her, Naruto led her out of the room and to the master bedroom, however plain as the entire place may be. Attached to the side of the room was the master bathroom, but for now, he led her to the bed, letting her sit down and rest for the moment. "Do not mind the slave seal. It was a part of the kinjutsu I used to free you, and it also gives me some semblance of protection. Like when you had tried to attack me earlier." Kurama said nothing in response, simply pulling the cloak around her body more tightly and keeping her head bowed. Sighing heavily, Naruto made his way to the door, opening it and pausing in the doorway. He then reached into a pocket and retrieved a storage scroll before setting it down on the dresser beside him. "Some clothes. Go ahead and get some rest. We'll talk later," Naruto told her before finally stepping out, gently closing the door behind him. Glancing up at the door Naruto had just left through, Kurama stayed quiet before glancing to the bathroom. Deciding to listen to what he said, Kurama pushed herself to her feet and made her way to the bathroom, fully intent on taking a shower before getting some sleep. Kurama let out a whine-like groan of complaint as she tugged and pulled at her top. She was dressed in a pair of baggy dark blue sweatpants and a light gray tank top Naruto had found amongst Haku's limited wardrobe, both items being far too small on her. Her hips were just wide enough for the hem of the sweatpants to dig into her hips, the leggings were tight on her thighs and rear while the cuffs stopped short of her ankles, and she had simply refused to wear Haku's undergarments. They were way too small for her, especially the bra. The top was stretched tight and barely covered her giant S, her fat cleavage bulging out of the low-cut collar while her S jutted out against the thin fabric of her top, her pink areola remaining visible through the overstretched cloth. Thankfully, Naruto let her keep the cloak, which she wore over everything for modesty while out and about. "I blame you for this," Kurama growled out at Naruto as they walked down the road. They had just returned to Konoha that morning, and after coming up with a bullshit story, Kurama was made a citizen of Konoha and made an official slave of Naruto's. Later, once Kakashi had left, Naruto had told the Sandaime the truth about Kurama, explaining in full detail as to the aspects of her existence outside of the seal placed upon his body on the night of his birth. To say the elderly Hokage was surprised was an understatement. At one point, Naruto swore the professor was having a heart attack. "I know you do, but at least I'm offering assistance," Naruto replied before guiding her into a clothing store. "Go ahead and get yourself a full wardrobe. Just let me know when you're ready to go." "Hi, Kurama muttered quietly before disappearing amongst the rows of clothing while Naruto sat down on one of the benches in the store, draping his arms over the back as he stared up at the ceiling out of sheer boredom. It wasn't the fact he had to go shopping for Kurama that bored him, but the simple fact he had nothing to do. Sure, he could train, but there was only so much that would do for him these days. It wasn't like he could die. But then again, he wouldn't be able to kill stronger opponents. Naruto? Someone asked curiously from a short distance away, making Naruto look at the source with hooded black and red eyes. Standing there was none other than Mitarashi Anko, who had a look of surprised curiosity on her face. She then gave him a beaming grin, happy to see one of her few friends. Walking over to him, she hopped up onto the bench and sat down on the back of it. "I knew it was you. So what brings you here, pretty eyes?" "Her," Naruto responded while leaning his head back and lifting a hand to point at Kurama. Following the direction his finger was pointing, Anko saw the auburn-haired woman and stared at her curiously before smirking teasingly. Before she could say anything, Naruto beat her to it. "No, we aren't. I met her while out in Wave Country. She asked to come to Konoha with us and I agreed. However, I accidentally made her my slave." "How the hell does that work?" Anko questioned while scrunching up her face with a look of utter confusion, giving Naruto an incredulous glance, but the redhead was still staring at the ceiling out of boredom. "While we were in Wave Country, I killed Momochi Zabuza and his apprentice, Haku, as well as the man that hired them, Gatu. Afterwards, I got curious and raided the man's compound for anything of value. While searching the basement, I came across Kurama. The thing is, she had been sold into the slave trade recently and was just freshly broken, but only in spirit. No one had broken her physically yet," Naruto remarked, lying through his teeth effortlessly. He was simply reciting the bullshit story he had told the Sandaime during the initial report. "Anyways, I had literally stumbled upon her, falling on top of her and waking her up. However, she started calling herself my slave and after being begged for a day or two, I finally relented and agreed to it, if only to make sure she was well cared for. That, and to make her shut up about it." "And why are you here?" Anko asked, leaning over and looking down at Naruto, who simply stared up at her with hooded eyes. Why did she have to be so damn curious? "While in Wave Country, I raided the hideout Zabuza and Haku had been using, looking for any clothing she could wear since she was nude when I found her," Naruto answered easily, turning his eyes back up to the ceiling. "Thus, I am in a clothing store with her, buying her new clothes that she likes and actually fit her." "And how does she have the same gorgeous eyes you do, Naruto?" Anko questioned right after he finished, making Naruto take a slow deep breath. She was getting irritating now. To ensure she didn't get killed or anything, I performed one of my jujutsu on her, making her like me. Only she doesn't have to drink blood like I do to sustain her strength. Naruto responded calmly and monotonously despite his growing annoyance. "The only catch is that if I were to somehow die, she would die as well. Luckily, my jujutsu keeps me from dying." "Ah, okay," Anko replied, nodding in acceptance, having known of his immortality thing just as long as he had known about her curse mark. When she opened her mouth to ask another question, Naruto closed his eyes and sighed before swiftly reaching up and covering her mouth with his hand before she could utter a single syllable, holding the lower half of her face with his hand and keeping her from breaking free. Screaming and complaining into his hand, Anko futilely struggled to free herself while Naruto continued to blankly stare at the ceiling. NGH. Kurama bit her bottom lip and blushed fiercely as she discovered the true size of her S, having found the only bra that fit her, just barely. It was an H-cup and it was still a bit snug, but she could deal with it. But still, why did they have to be so big? Luckily, it was a simple black bra that was surprisingly comfortable despite being a bit tight and it matched the black panties she had selected earlier. Sighing with reluctant resignment, Kurama dressed herself in her new chosen attire and examined herself in the full body mirror to her right. She was now dressed in an ankle-length black skirt with a slit running up her left leg all the way to her hip. A pair of black spandex short shorts underneath the skirt. A mesh top with sleeves that ended just before her elbows. A sleeveless and midriff-bearing zippered body-hugging black hoodie over it that she kept zipped up with her hair pulled forward over her left shoulder and the hood pulled up over her head. Black fingerless elbow-length gloves on her forearms. Black kunoichi sandals on her feet. and a black bandana tied around her neck that she could pull up to cover the lower half of her face should she need to or want to. It also helped hide her cleavage better when not in use. Kurama was quiet as she gently touched the slave kanji on her stomach while staring at it in the mirror, a strangely warm feeling filling her. For some reason, Kurama found herself feeling proud of the mark. It was weird because the entire time since she had been first imprisoned inside of Uzumaki Mito, Kurama had wanted nothing more than to either break free of the seals containing her or take control of her containers, with either option resulting in the destruction of her container's body. Naruto had been no exception. Until he gave me a physical form again. All because I was the only person to stay with him this whole time, whether by choice or not. Kurama mused, another feeling of warmth filling her as she thought of his answer as to why he gave her this body. Her mind then generated some rather steamy images and scenarios against her will, causing her cheeks to burn with a dark blush. Placing her hands on the wall of the changing room to steady herself, Kurama found herself shivering out of unexpected desire and need, her legs suddenly becoming weak and unsteady as her lust for him momentarily spiked. Wah! What is this feeling? Why am I behaving like this all of a sudden? Shaking her head to clear it of such images and thoughts, Kurama took a minute to recompose herself before neatly folding and stacking her new clothes, gathering them up in her arms as she stepped out of the changing room. It was at that moment she found Naruto holding a purple-haired woman in fishnets and a trench coat by the face, keeping her at arm's length with a bored expression on his face as he stared at the ceiling while the woman was struggling to pull away from his hand and escape his clutches, screaming and doubtlessly cursing into the palm of his hand the whole time. "Leave the poor woman alone, master," Kurama remarked, only to blush and her eyes to widen slightly when she realized that she had addressed him as master, and not brat, as she had intended. What the hell was going on? Fine, Naruto muttered nonchalantly as he finally let Anko go, making the older woman fall back with a brief cry and land on her back. Internally, however, Naruto was smirking. The slave seal was taking effect. What no one knew was the fact that it affected a person's mind and behavior over time, turning even the most stubborn and dominant into the most submissive and obedient. He was honestly surprised it was taking effect so soon. It had only been a week since he had performed the Akuryu Fukatsu no Yokusei Jujutsu on her. It shouldn't be taking hold so fast. Gah, what the hell, pretty eyes. If you wanted me to be quiet, you just had to ask. Anko spat as she sat up and glared at Naruto, who simply stood up and stuffed his hands in his pockets. Pointless. You wouldn't have listened, Naruto responded as he walked away with Kurama to pay for her new clothes. Anko couldn't help agreeing with him. Yeah, you got a. Hey. Anko spat at the end, realizing what Naruto had actually said, crossing her arms over her chest and pouting childishly for a moment. Geez. Naruto sighed as he found his custom-ordered sharkskin wallet to be uncomfortably empty for once. Sighing once more and slipping it into his back pocket as they walked down the road, Naruto glanced over at Kurama, who seemed to be in deep thought as she walked a couple steps behind him. Taking a moment to examine her attire, Naruto noticed that she had left the slave kanji visible, almost as if she were proud of it. That was something unexpected. From what he knew of the technique, most of those the slave seal had been used on tried to hide the mark at all times, almost as if they were ashamed of it. The only time they weren't was after the seal had taken full effect and had completely reworked their personality and behavior. Then again, it had never before been used on a Biju spirit inhabiting a once-dead body. Hey, you alright? Naruto inquired as he slowed down a little so that he fell in step beside Kurama, startling her from her thoughts. Even though she was his slave, Naruto still cared for her. She was still one of his very few friends. She was probably the only one, now that he thought about it. Huh? Why yeah, just confused. Kurama responded quietly before blushing faintly and looking away stubbornly. Don't worry about it, I'm fine. Whatever you say. Naruto replied, hanging the bags he was carrying over his left shoulder for a more lax stance. He then noticed one of his favorite restaurants. While he needed blood to keep up his strength, it didn't mean he still couldn't enjoy food like normal people. Hey, you hungry? How's barbecue sound to you? That actually doesn't sound too bad, master. The auburn-haired Biju answered, blushing fiercely again when she called him master again, this time with a slight stutter as her voice softened upon uttering the word. Having attempted to say something else, but it still came out as master. Why did she keep calling him that? It was starting to bother her, but for some reason, it sounded right. Shaking her head to clear her thoughts, Kurama followed after Naruto as he made a shadow clone and had it take Kurama's clothes back to his apartment before leading her to the barbecue restaurant for some lunch. Whistling a dark tune as he walked deeper into Training Ground 13 for some experimentation, Naruto found Kurama's presence to be interesting. Before, he was perfectly content with living alone, but now that he wasn't anymore, Naruto couldn't even sleep at night without being in the same room as Kurama. Strangely enough, it turned out that neither could she. It had been 6 weeks and she had been adapting to her new living situation rather well and was even starting to thoroughly enjoy it, much to Naruto's relief. His greatest fear when he transferred Kurama's spirit from his body and into the one she now inhabited was that she would hate it and, by osmosis, hate him. It was mostly because he was unable to reverse the process. Doing so would kill him despite his immortality. The only reason he survived to begin with was because he was an Uzumaki, and only an Uzumaki had the potential to survive having a Biju spirit removed from their bodies. They were also the only ones capable of successfully containing the Kyuubi, but he didn't really care about that fact anymore. "Man, I don't know how I'm going to do this," Naruto suddenly grumbled, scratching the back of his head as he came to a stop in the middle of a clearing. He had known of his mother, Uzumaki Kushina, for some time, but he just never bothered bringing it up to anyone. That was when Kurama had mentioned his mother having some weird ability that involved creating chains of chakra that shot out of her body, and it got Naruto's attention. Unfortunately, it was like having to build all of Konoha by himself without an instruction manual while his only tools were a paperclip, a rubber band, and a tuning fork. "No, wait, that's what I used to make a slingshot back when I was a kid. Why don't you try focusing your chakra and pushing it out from a specific part of your body?" Kurama offered, taking a seat under a tree with her legs tucked under her to watch Naruto. Glancing at her with a cocked eyebrow, Naruto shrugged, figuring it wouldn't hurt to try. Or would it? Dismissing the thought, Naruto decided to try doing it with the palm of his right hand. If it ruined the glove, then, oh, well. He had a dozen identical pairs of them anyways. Closing his eyes for a moment and gathering his chakra in the middle of his right palm, Naruto started pushing it through, and what resulted from it caught him off guard completely. "Boom. Sanuva. Cough, bitch." Naruto groaned from his spot under a tree, having been sent flying several meters by the explosive detonation of chakra. Upon hitting the ground face first, Naruto was sent tumbling until he hit a tree, sitting on his neck and shoulders while his feet hung forward in front of his head. Hearing Kurama giggling relentlessly, Naruto could only groan with discomfort again before he slowly fell over onto his left side, grunting slightly as he did. He looked at his right hand, cocking an eyebrow when he found his glove undamaged along with the rest of his clothes. Hell, even his mesh top was untouched, and the damn thing always got ruined no matter what he was doing. He could be standing still in the middle of nowhere and it would still get damaged somehow. "Huh, weird. Come on, give it another try," Kurama called out from across the clearing, prompting Naruto to raise his right hand and flip her off, which only made Kurama laugh even more. Sighing heavily as he pushed himself off the ground and walked back into the middle of the clearing, Naruto dusted himself off and decided to try again. This time, not so much chakra and less force. Naruto muttered quietly to himself, making the proper adjustments as he did. However, just like before, the chakra exploded in his hand and sent him right back to where he was and in the exact same position. Gaining a flat look, Naruto stared off into the distance. Sanuva bitch. Another month passed by, and with it being one of Team 7's rare days off, Naruto was lounging on his couch lazily, staring up at the ceiling out of boredom. Hearing a noise across the room, he glanced over and watched as Kurama stepped out of the bathroom with a towel wrapped around her and started walking to their shared room. Due to her not wanting to sleep in the same bed as him, Naruto had taken the one in the spare room he never used and moved it into his. Watching as she disappeared down the short hallway, Naruto found himself feeling strange about her. He couldn't tell if it was lust from the figure her now human body had taken due to the jujutsu he had used on it while transferring her spirit into it, or if it was from honest feelings for her, or quite possibly something else entirely, but whatever it was distracting. A pleasant one, but a distraction nonetheless. "I wonder if I should do something nice for her, but what? Naruto pondered idly as Kurama exited the room, only to remember something and head back into the room, his eyes spotting the markings on her stomach. Somehow, the slave seal had seemingly stalled out. Apart from being unable to call him anything other than Master or Naruto-sama, it hadn't really affected her all that much, personality-wise. Sure, she had become more submissive than she had originally been when he first placed the seal on her, but it wasn't anything real drastic. He had noticed that she had taken to doing most of the chores around the apartment after the first week of living with him, with the only exceptions being that she refused to take out the trash and had virtually no real talent in cooking, but he didn't complain. He didn't really eat at home, preferring to just get takeout or stopping by a restaurant and the like. It was possible that she simply did the chores to keep herself busy, since he left her home by herself most of the time, but it was also just as possible, but less likely, that it was a side effect of the slave seal. As Kurama came back out of the room while pulling her hair back into a ponytail, Naruto couldn't help noticing that she was clad in a pair of black spandex capri pants that flattered the contours of her legs and rear, while a tight-fitting dark red midriff-bearing tank top struggled to contain her obscenely large S, the valley of her cleavage bulging out of the low-cut collar ever so slightly. Once again spotting the slave seal, Naruto started weighing the pros and cons of either deactivating the seal or just removing it completely. She hadn't shown any signs of wanting to hurt him since she first woke up in her new body and behaved as if she was actually content with her new form, but it could also be caused by the slave seal itself. Since there had been no record of anyone actually removing the seal and freeing the person, or persons, they had enslaved, Naruto had no idea what would happen if he removed it. Would she return to her old ways and try to kill him the moment it was removed? Were the seal's effects even permanent, or did they last only so long as the seal was in place? There was just so little known about the slave seal outside of how to apply, remove it, and what it did once placed. Not only that, but it was always placed on normal living humans, not the body of a dead woman that was inhabited by the soul of a biju. Everything he was contemplating was unknown territory filled with unknown mysteries and countless possibilities. Naruto-sama? Kurama suddenly inquired, snapping Naruto out of his thoughts as he realized that she was now sitting on the couch opposite of him. You've been staring at me for the past 10 minutes and it's starting to creep me out. Sorry, I must have zoned out. Naruto mumbled quietly before yawning as he stared back up at the ceiling. They sat in silence for several minutes, mostly from Naruto slipping back into his thoughts again while Kurama just wasn't much of a talkative person. Hey, Kurama, I was thinking about something. What would you honestly do if you were completely free? As you are now, I mean. What brought this on all of a sudden? Kurama asked, caught off guard by the question. Getting a wordless shrug and a glance from Naruto, she figured she might as well give him an answer and thought about it for a moment. I don't know, really, why? Just a random thought, Naruto mumbled out without looking away from the ceiling again. The silence that followed was deafening for Kurama, who found herself lost in thought as well. The creepy little red head had actually been growing on her since she was freed from that cramped cage she had been stuck in since she had first been sealed up inside of him. A while back, she had figured out that the source of her recent strange behavior, her being unable to verbally address Naruto as nothing else other than Master, or Naruto-sama, specifically, had been the slave seal on her stomach, which she had also figured out to be completely separate from the technique he had used to put her soul into the body she now possessed. While she had originally, and briefly, been upset that he had lied to her about that little fact, Kurama couldn't find a reason to blame him for it. He was simply trying to protect himself, despite being immortal for the most part, and if she were honest with herself, Kurama knew that he had been treating her relatively well even though she was technically his slave. He never forced her to do anything degrading or humiliating. He never talked down to her or insulted her. He didn't even abuse her in any way. However, after several weeks of vigilantly observing him, Kurama had discovered the real reason as to why he had transferred her spirit into her new body. Naruto was lonely. Sure, it was partly his own fault, but the villagers were to blame for most of it, having pushed him too far in their efforts to rid themselves of a monster, only to create one in the end. Having existed for countless years since the sage split the Jubi apart and created her and the other 8 Biju, Kurama understood how he felt, having eventually isolated herself from the other Biju and went into hiding, for the most part, not long after the sage died. She had been alone, emotionally, ever since then. That's when a thought struck her. Is he thinking about getting rid of the seal? Kurama thought in surprise, leaning against the armrest of the couch casually while resting a hand over the kanji that stained her abdomen, disguising the action as she thought about it. She didn't let her feelings show, but Kurama was sincerely touched by the possibility. It meant that Naruto was, at least partly, concerned about her personal happiness and was currently entertaining the thought of possibly giving up his only constant companion just so that she was truly free to do whatever she wanted. She couldn't tell if it was the seal that made her chest ache at the thought or not. Did she even want to be free anymore? Yeah, it would be nice to maybe travel around the world and see how much it had changed since she had last been out without everyone freaking out about a giant nine-tailed fox heading their way, but still, Kurama had grown comfortable with her new life, and while living with Naruto was about as peaceful as a world-ending hurricane most of the time and about as boring as watching grass grow the rest of the time, she honestly couldn't picture not having him in her life after being with him since he had been born and seeing his admittedly horrible life through his eyes. Kurama chewed on her bottom lip slightly in silence for a few moments before getting up from the couch and making her way over to him. Without a word, she laid down on the couch beside him, putting her back to him and resting her head on his arm, blushing a little out of nervousness as she did. Confused and a little surprised by it, Naruto could only stare at Kurama as she laid beside him since she had never done anything remotely close to wanting any sort of real physical contact with him, but he still moved over a little to let her get more comfortable. Smiling slightly as she adjusted her position, Kurama let her eyes close and relaxed, relieved that Naruto hadn't pushed her away. She then decided to give Naruto's question an actual answer. Hey, Naruto-sama? I think I know what I would do if I were free. What's that? Naruto mumbled out as he let his eyes close. Ever since they had been separated, the closer together they were, the more relaxed they became. Probably because of the original seal that still bound them together at some level. Kurama pressed a little closer to him and nuzzled his biceps slightly, letting out a quiet sigh as she relaxed. I'd probably stay right here, next to you. She answered softly, her blush growing with each word as she closed her eyes and got a little more comfortable, choosing to take a nap right where she was. Little did she know, Naruto's own cheeks were burning with a blush of his own at her words, more surprised by her answer than anything else. Naruto was silent as he sat in the chair in the testing room for the first exam of the Chunin selection exams. It had been about 3.5 months since he had first attempted to recreate his mother's chakra chains and he had yet to get anywhere with it other than successfully blowing himself up. Kicking his feet up on the desk and clasping his hands behind his head, Naruto leaned the chair back on its hind legs and stared up at the ceiling. He hated written tests. He also hated paperwork in general, and after discovering that most of the work a Hokage does is paperwork, Naruto quickly found another dream, being a hunter nin. Or an Anbu agent, maybe a combat instructor at the academy? Ooh, that'd be fun. Naruto thought to himself, snickering at the mental image of the students freaking out after he somehow broke his neck and was still alive or was covered in kunai and shuriken and was grinning like an idiot the whole time. I bet they'd call me Dedo-sensei. Ibiki was silent as he kept his eye on the strange red head. He had heard about him being supposedly immortal due to being a Jashinist or something, along with having an incredibly foul mouth at times. He also used to have a nasty reputation as a nefarious prankster when he was younger. Luckily, after graduating to genin, the number of pranks reported across the village had plummeted drastically. When Naruto snickered to himself again with another vicious grin on his face while staring up at the ceiling, Ibiki's eyes narrowed, his eyebrow twitching. What is he planning? He's up to something, but what? The Tokubetsu Junin pondered. He loathed the redhead, who seemed completely immune to his torture and interrogation tactics. Naruto had once broken into the Anbu tea and department just so he could spend some time with Ibiki in one of the legendary interrogation rooms. For some reason, Ibiki had found it difficult to even look at Naruto as another human being, but it was to be expected when Naruto continued to taunt him and laugh hysterically while Ibiki used almost every trick he had to make Naruto talk. Including physical torture such as beating the shit out of him, cutting him, stabbing him, electrocuting him, waterboarding, burning, and anything else that came to his mind, including a few methods that often killed the victims. Hell, he couldn't even make the brat tell him what color the sky was. Well, not the right color, at least. And yet after a visit from Yamanaka Inoichi, Naruto had instead managed to reverse the psyche evaluation on the blonde mind walker, still pass the evaluation with flying colors, and cause Inoichi to commit himself to a few months of psychological therapy sessions of his own. Ehehe. That'd be awesome. I could scare the little kids all day long and teach them something at the same time. Naruto continued imagining himself as an instructor at the academy. That was when a frown formed at a thought. But if I'm a teacher, that also means paperwork, and I hate paperwork. Okay, scratch that. I'm not being a teacher. Maybe a Chunin instructor? Yeah, that'd be cool. Get my own group of runts to boss around and brainwash into being obedient little minions as I train them to be super powerful and kick bad guy ass. Ehehehehe. Excellent. Hinata was silent as she glanced at the redhead sitting beside her, her cheeks turning a faint pink as she stared at his relatively bare, chiseled abdomen. Ever since she had first seen him back in the academy, there was something about him that kept drawing her attention, eventually causing her to form a crush on him that had only been growing stronger ever since. Standing at 5 feet 6 inches, Hinata's dark indigo hair was waist-length and pulled forward to hang over her right shoulder in a smooth glossy curtain. Her skin was a pale light cream color that was free of blemish, and her eyes were a soft shade of lavender unlike the usual stark white pupil-less eyes of the Hyuga clan. She was dressed in a pair of baggy black pants, a black short-sleeve skin-tight top under her incredibly baggy lavender hoodie that had white sleeves and lavender cuffs, black kunoichi sandals on her feet, and her hitei tied around her neck on a black cloth. Like usual, she had the hood pulled over her head and her hands were hidden by the cuffs of her sleeves. She hummed softly, noticing something about his test paper that was trapped under the heel of his right boot. The entire page had been covered in the jagged sketch of the pendant that hung at his left hip. Written beneath it in the same sketchy format were the words, "Fuck you, Morino." Frowning slightly at the vulgarity, Hinata glanced back at Naruto's face and blushed faintly before looking back down at her own paper and reactivating her Byakugan, using her bangs to hide her eyes from view as she cheated off someone else's paper. So that's Uzumaki Naruto, I don't see what's got Orochimaru-sama so excited about him. Kabuto mused curiously as he glanced back at Naruto, using the reflection in the window beside him to see the red-haired genin sitting a couple rows behind him. I'll have to keep my eye on him. Oh. Maybe I could work at a really fancy restaurant as a chef, cut my pinky off, and stick it in someone's food before they're served. Naruto thought darkly with an evil grin, his eyes glinting with insanity. It was obvious his thoughts were progressively getting darker and darker. But then there'd be all that damn paperwork from the lawsuit. Fuck. Alright, pencils down. We'll begin the 10th question now. Ibiki called out, startling a few of the weaker-hearted genin present. Fucking finally. I thought I would actually die of boredom over here. Naruto exclaimed as he brought his feet off the desk, a vicious fanged grin splitting his face as he leaned forward and locked eyes with Ibiki, who simply stared back coldly. He would never openly admit it, but those strange eyes of Naruto's creeped him out a little. Arg, god fucking damn it. Naruto roared to the sky, making his teammates take a step away from him and sigh. What is it with these people and fucking paperwork? Relax, will ya? It's just one piece of paper and all you have to do is sign it. It's a liability waiver. Sasake growled out at the psychotic redhead, digging the tip of his pinky finger into his ear in an attempt to fix his hearing in that particular ear. If you don't sign it, you can't participate. Well, fuck that. I'm killing something today. Naruto snarled, gaining a strangely wicked grin on his eyes as he signed the paper with a flourish, except it was in the same sketchy and ragged form as what he had scribbled onto the test sheet back at the academy. He couldn't help it. Immortality didn't mean he was instantly gifted with perfect handwriting, which was really weird since his calligraphy skills in Fuinjutsu were near the level of a seal master. Sounds like someone's a little. Kiba joked with Choji, only for Naruto to suddenly glare at him over his shoulder with a crazed look in his eyes. You wanna be that, something? Naruto growled out at Kiba, making the normally brash and stupidly courageous Inuzuka shake his head negatively, paling with fear as he broke out into a cold sweat. Snorting in response, Naruto turned back around. That's what I thought, bitch. Jeez. What's got you so wound up today, Naruto? Sakura muttered, making Naruto grin fiendishly and cruelly. It only served to make the pinkette shiver slightly, pitying the poor fool that would be Naruto's next victim. He, blood. This forest. I can smell it. Naruto muttered with madness for a moment before speaking a little more clearly, though insanity remained present in his tone. This forest is covered in blood and it smells delicious. I can't wait to add my own share to feed its plant life. Okay. Memo to self. Don't let Naruto near my garden. Ever. Sakura thought to herself, creeped out by her teammates' sudden bout of obnoxious insanity. As they turned in their waivers and were handed an earth scroll, Sasake immediately passed it to Naruto, who merely cocked an eyebrow and silently slipped the scroll into a pouch behind his waist. Except, he never got an answer, which made Naruto pout slightly, but he let it go after a moment while another thought crossed his mind. Ehehehe. I can't wait to test them out. Naruto muttered, slipping his fingers into the pouches at his hips. Hearing him, Sasake and Sakura glanced at him as they neared their designated gate. Test what out, Naruto? You learn a new jujutsu or whatever they were? Sakura replied, only for Naruto's face to be split by the bloodthirsty grin of a feral madman. Reaching into the pouches until his forearms had disappeared into them, Naruto withdrew his arms, revealing the weapons he had been learning to use properly since he first became immortal. His wrists were covered in a broad ring of smooth dark crimson metal that locked his wrists in place, while the same dark crimson metal stretched down to his elbows and covered the back of his hands, with a second plate covering his palms. Touching the tips of his index and middle fingers to the bracelet of either item, the metal around his forearms somehow expanded to completely wrap around the forelimb, sheathing his fingers in claws of dagger-sharp metal. The spiked strip running across his knuckles fused with the new gauntlets before a line of back-swept spikes ran down the length of the gauntlets to his elbows. Not exactly. Naruto commented while flexing his armored hands, his eyes gleaming with insanity and a lust for slaughter. I came across these when I became immortal. The only reason I haven't used them yet is because I hadn't quite figured out how to activate them until just last week. I plan on ripping apart at least a dozen hapless fools while we're here, so try to cut the chatter short, alright? Hi. Sasake muttered, finding himself feeling afraid of his teammate again. In the past, he never thought of the redhead as a threat, but after the fight on the bridge back in Wave Country. Specifically, the deaths of the demon brothers. There was just something about Naruto that continued to unsettle him, paralyzing him with fear sometimes, and terrorizing him with reoccurring nightmares of the taller and slightly older genin. For some reason, his fears had begun to tweak his nightmares of the Uchiha massacre, replacing Itachi with Naruto. Instead of hatred, Sasake only felt fear. The scream of terror and pain echoed through the forest, bringing a smirk to Naruto's face before he started chuckling, only for it to become hysterical laughter. Although it still scared his teammates, they were slowly starting to get used to his fits of maddening instability. Ah. Oh, I can't wait to be unleashed upon some pathetic fucker. Naruto snarled with barely restrained excitement and anxiety. It was made obvious, not just by his insane ramblings, but also by the constant flexing of his armored and clawed hands, his slitted red and black eyes darting back and forth in search of prey to rip apart. He had already ripped apart 3 giant tigers, skinned 2 giant snakes, and mauled a giant bear that inhabited the forest of death with his clawed gauntlets. When they came to a stop in a clearing, Naruto suppressed a growling whine not unlike that of an anxious wolf pacing back and forth as it awaited the order to attack. Grr. What the fuck are we stopping for? I have to piss. Sasake muttered back in reply, disappearing behind some bushes. Letting out another growling whine, Naruto actually started pacing back and forth. It had only been 30 minutes and he had heard the deaths of at least 5 people, yet not a single unlucky bastard crossed their path. It just wasn't fair. Why did the unworthy maggots get such precious gifts? Hearing a rustling of leaves behind him, Naruto glanced behind him to find Sasake stepping back out, a faint look of relief on his face. Naruto's eyes narrowed, sensing that something wasn't right. Come on, let's get going. We have a long, Yari Jigoku. Naruto suddenly spat as he stepped forward with his right foot while turning his right side towards the Uchiha, thrusting his right hand forward at an upward angle from his hip with his clawed fingers extended forward and palm up. Instantly, his gauntlet sparked with crimson electricity before a smooth and narrow cone of blackened rock and earth burst from the ground just a couple feet in front of him, shooting forward and impacting Sasake's face, destroying the genin's skull in an explosion of blood and gore as the spear continued on to impale the tree behind him. Just before Sakura could scream in terror, the henge was dispelled, revealing the headless remains of an aimed genin. "Go get him and stay out of the way. I'll deal with the others." "Oh, others?" Sakura stuttered out as she turned to face her suddenly calm and apathetic teammate when two more genin appeared on the other side of the clearing, dressed similarly to their fallen teammate. Without another word, Sakura disappeared into the forest to locate Sasake. At the same time, Naruto cracked his neck and popped his knuckles, a small and vicious fanged smirk forming before slowly spreading into a broad, but slim grin of pure malice. "You killed Mubi, you son of a bitch." Kagari hissed as he readied a handful of kunai. Oboro simply started running through hand seals before falling upon the last one and calling the name of his technique. "Kasumi Jusha," he stated coldly before black-clad and blindfolded figures started rising from the ground or pulling themselves out of any other surface around the clearing while the two white-clad genin sunk into the ground. Naruto's grin only became more manic as his eyes widened with an even greater thirst for blood. It was a weak genjutsu, but Naruto didn't care. He loved playing with his food before going for the kill. The fear added natural seasonings to their blood. Ehehehe. Ha 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 ha. Naruto started laughing again as a kunai was impaled in his forehead only for another to stab into the right side of his throat, two more to embed themselves in his upper back, three in his stomach, two in his right thigh, one in his left, one in the right side of his chest, three in the left, and four more kunai to bury their biting blades in his lower back. His laughter never stopped, however, only growing louder and louder with every new blade. Ha ha ha. Ah. Wah. What the fuck is this guy? Kagari whispered to his remaining teammate fearfully before chucking another kunai just as Naruto turned only his upper body and leaned back slightly, grinning wickedly as he looked directly at them despite being stuck in the genjutsu, the thrown dagger stabbing into his right eye without notice from the redhead. Oboro and Kagari froze with absolute fear, both visibly shaking as Naruto turned towards them fully and started walking towards him. Dee-da, da, dee-dee-da. Ehehehe. Naruto chuckled quietly and darkly for a few moments, disappearing halfway and letting the sound echo through the clearing for a moment before reappearing behind them. Grabbing the blindfolded aimed genin by the back of his shirt, Naruto pulled him close before sinking his fangs into the side of Kaguri's neck from behind while his claws dug into the teen's left shoulder and the right side of his chest, the genin screaming with terror and pain the entire time until he became too weak with blood loss. Oboro let out a scream of fear of his own as he stumbled back, only to fall. Crawling backwards out of utter terror, Oboro watched as Naruto dropped Kaguri's bloodless corpse on the ground, his mouth and chin dripping with crimson blood. "Saint, stay back," Oboro hissed frightfully as Naruto wiped his chin with his right hand before crouching down and drawing a circle on Kaguri's forehead in the dead genin's own blood, adding an upside-down triangle to the inside of the circle before holding his hand over the mark. "Wah! What are you doing to him? He. Jujutsu. Shite Gujin Ketsueki Shoji." Naruto muttered with a monstrous grin on his face, never taking his eyes off of the sole living aimed genin in the clearing. He watched as Oboro's eyes widened with even greater fear as Naruto's and Kaguri's skin blackened before white skeletal markings formed. His grin grew even more maddening as tears came to Oboro's eyes as Kaguri's possessed corpse began to stand back up and turn towards him. Reaching over and tearing off Kaguri's rebreather mask as he formed a single hand seal, Naruto stated the name of his next technique. Jujutsu. Kanaberu Kupusu. Gra. Kagari groaned out as his mouth opened, revealing the sharp teeth that now filled his jaws as his nails became large claws of bone that tore through the meat and skin of his fingertips. Oboro started whimpering fearfully as he continued crawling back, unable to tear his eyes away from the monstrosity his dead teammate and friend had become. Opening his mouth even wider until the flesh of his cheeks were ripped and torn, Kagari started advancing on Oboro, causing the momentarily still living aimed genin to let loose a scream of unholy horror and agony. The whole time, Naruto could only laugh with bloodlusting insanity as he started pulling the kunai out of his body, watching the possessed corpse of Kagari begin to eat Oboro while the genin was still alive. Once Oboro was dead, Naruto frowned slightly, realizing the genin's corpse was too heavily mauled to be of any use to him. His healing factor was good, but it only repaired the damage done to a corpse puppet after being possessed. Forming a hand seal, Naruto whispered, "Kai," under his breath, causing Kagari's corpse to disappear in a plume of smoke just as his teammates neared. A couple moments later, Sasake and Sakura appeared from the brush, both noticing the lack of a third body from the genin team, but they knew better than to pursue such inquiries whenever Naruto was involved. They were afraid of what the answer might be. "NGH, they caught me off guard," Sasake muttered out, the closest thing to an apology they were going to get, as he and Sakura did their best to ignore the fear and disgust welling up inside of them. Naruto didn't respond, only grinning madly still after adding another puppet to his collection. Checking Oboro's mutilated corpse, Sasake found the Heaven Scroll in the now deceased genin's possession. Without another word, they returned to their journey, heading straight for the central tower. "These are fun and all, but," Naruto mumbled to himself as he took his gauntlets off, putting them back in his pouches before retrieving a length of chain from one of them. At one end, there was a sickle and at the other, a foot-long barbed harpoon-like blade. "This should give me some proper entertainment." Sakura could only stare at him incredulously, the mauled and mutilated remains of a tacky genin team scattered around the small clearing. Sasake merely shivered slightly, dreading what kind of carnage their undying teammate would reap after seeing what he could do in close quarters. It didn't really help Naruto's case with him being splattered in blood from head to toe, his eyes gleaming with a lust for slaughter as he wrapped the chain around his right forearm with plenty of slack for either end, the sickle grasped in his left hand while he held the harpoon blade in his right. "Ow!" Sasake hissed quietly as something suddenly cut his cheek, only to notice how the wind had picked up and quite quickly, too. His eyes widened in realization. "More enemies? Ha ha ha." Finally, Naruto howled with excitement, flinging the sickle at a nearby exposed tree root. Just as the chain wrapped around the root with the sickle blade stabbing into the wood, Naruto lost his footing due to the wind suddenly growing too powerful for him to stay standing, his teammates having already gone for cover. After a few moments, the wind died back down, the clearing cloaked in a cloud of dust and dirt kicked up by the gale. Getting back on his feet, Naruto yanked on the chain to dislodge it before retracting it, his eyes sliding back and forth in search of prey. "You guys just play around over there. I'll take of them myself," the long-haired one ordered, only for a blade to stab into the masked Kusa shinobi's thigh, drawing out a cry of pain from the man as he was suddenly yanked off his feet and dragged into the lingering dust clouds. "What the hell? Hee hee hee." The dark and malicious chuckling echoed throughout the clearing, followed shortly by another scream of pain from the Kusa genin in his clutches. The sound of flesh being ripped was heard before yet another scream was heard. The chuckling quickly became maniacal laughter. "Your little friend is quite entertaining. I always did love a good screamer. RGGHH." The Kusa genin howled, only for the screaming to grow quieter and quieter as seconds passed before finally going silent. A moment later, the Kusa genin was thrown back out at the feet of his teammates, his body deathly pale and drained of blood. "Hee hee hee hee. Anyone else want to play?" Naruto taunted as the dust finally settled where he was at, his mouth and chin covered in blood from feeding on the man he had caught, the harpoon spike dripping with more of the crimson fluid as it swayed slightly, dangling from his right hand. Casually spinning the harpoon end, Naruto flashed his bloodied fangs with a crazed grin. "No volunteers? Damn bastard." The other Kusa genin growled as he moved to throw a kunai, only for the harpoon tip to fly by his head just as he grabbed onto one of the throwing knives. A moment later and the chain was wrapped around his neck before he was yanked off his feet, only for the sickle blade to be flung up and around before it came straight down on top of him just as he landed on his back, the hooked blade stabbing into his stomach just below his ribcage. "Arg, your friend screamed better," the redhead mumbled in disappointment with a flat look before using his chain to draw him in closer. All the while, the disguised Orochimaru could only watch with wide eyes, fascinated by the boy's behavior. He didn't care about the two ninja with him, he had been planning on getting rid of them later anyways. Grabbing the Kusa shinobi by his shirt with one hand and hefting him up, Naruto pulled his chain away from the man's neck before sinking his fangs into his throat, drinking hungrily. Apart from the aim genin earlier, he hadn't had human blood in months, and now that he had the opportunity to feed properly without consequences, he was going to take full advantage of it and feed as much as possible. After several moments, he finally let the bloodless corpse drop to the ground, taking a moment to clean the blood from his mouth and chin before licking his hand clean. He then calmly glanced over at the other one. His instincts were telling him that he was far stronger than the two pathetic bastards he had just fed from. Not like it would stop him from feeding. He didn't know why, but the greater amount of chakra a person had, the more delicious their blood was. Season it with fear and it was the greatest thing in the world, in his opinion. How about you? Want a tangle, tranny? Orochimaru couldn't help smirking cruelly. And what makes you think you can handle me, Naruto-kun? How the hell do you know my name? Naruto asked, tilting his head to the side with a cocked eyebrow. Shrugging before the last Kusa genin present could answer, Naruto started spinning the barbed spear tip of his chain. Never mind. It doesn't matter. I'll be draining you dry of blood here shortly. Really now? Orochimaru responded a bit sarcastically, his smirk growing more malicious as his clone, having been hidden, came up from behind the redhead with a kunai. Before Naruto could escape after noticing the clone's presence, the clone channeled chakra into the kunai, forming a simple blade that easily sliced through his neck, causing both his skull and his body to hit the ground. What was that about draining me dry? You motherfucker, that shit hurts. Naruto howled, his head lying on the ground while glaring at the man from his spot. Suddenly moving from its spot, his body pushed up off the ground and started getting back up while picking up his head and putting it back in place, the wound healing completely in seconds. Snarling rabidly, Naruto spun in place and kicked the clone in the neck with the heel of his foot, destroying it as he grabbed his chain and glared at the enemy again. You're going to pay for that. So the rumors were true. Orochimaru hissed quietly in surprise, only to grin more viciously. You really are immortal. HMPH. What was your first fucking clue? Naruto snapped before charging the man, spinning both ends of his chain as he ran. Amused by the seemingly unkillable genin spirit, Orochimaru was about to humor the boy when he felt something suddenly stab into his back, only for Naruto to lunge at him from in front, driving the harpoon into the man's chest. Glancing back, he was shocked to see another redhead identical to the first, its hands and forearms wreathed in clawed crimson gauntlets while gripping an identical chain as the original. Having only been a clone, however, Orochimaru collapsed into mud before the original speared the clone on his Kusanagi sword while the other received a kunai between his eyes. He was confused, however, when neither went up in smoke or anything. Snarling, Naruto stared down at the blade sticking out of his chest still. You stupid fuck, you ruined my favorite fucking shirt. What? How is this possible? The snake-like man hissed in shock and fascination, only to cry out in pain when Naruto, still impaled on his sword, suddenly stabbed his claws into both thighs and raked them along his flesh. Yanking his sword free, Orochimaru moved to cut him down, only for Naruto to spin around and block the blade with the armored palm of his right hand, his clawed fingers wrapping around the blade and locking it in place. Keeping him from getting his sword, Naruto touched the bleeding wound on his chest before forming a single hand seal. Jujutsu. Ketsueki Bunshin. Naruto snarled as the blood left behind from where he had been beheaded, where his clone had been stabbed in the head, and where his blood had pooled from being skewered. The crimson liquid rose up and formed a new copy of the red head. Normally, this technique would only last until the clone is killed, but with my healing factor, they might as well be the real me. Which isn't me, by the way. What? Orochimaru hissed in shock, only for a chain to drop down from above and loop around his neck, lifting him off the ground. Before he could do anything else, 4 more shot out and wrapped around his wrists and ankles, pulling his limbs out to his sides, keeping him from moving. Damn, brat. Yeah. A word of advice, the more you fight it. Naruto grinned as he approached the Kusa shinobi from the branch he was level with. The more delicious your blood tastes. So, by all means, fight it. Urk. Orochimaru began to hiss, only to choke as Naruto sunk his fangs in his neck. However, after a moment, Naruto pulled back and spit out a glob of mud, the person in front of him dissolving into more of it while his clones retracted their chains. HS's. The hiss came from behind him, making Naruto scowl slightly and slowly turn around to find himself eye level with a giant serpent. Well, now, this just might pose a problem. Naruto grunted out as the snake bared its fangs and reared back to strike. At the same time, Naruto rushed forward, snarling in rage as he splayed his clawed fingers, lunging just as the snake moved to snap him up in its jaws. For you, Jujutsu. Kokuyu Sume. Slashing his claws into the roof of the giant snake's mouth, Naruto watched as the bloody slash marks continued down the entire length of its body, killing it before the summon could return to where it had come from. However, still in its mouth, Naruto didn't have time to get away before its head fell back to the ground. Groaning as he opened his eyes again a few moments after hitting the ground, Naruto stared at the broken-off giant fang pinning him to the ground through his stomach while Orochimaru approached him from the side of his face looking melted, almost. Unbeknownst to the redhead, Orochimaru had already been fighting Sasake while using only clones to keep the redhead busy. Fucking bastard, I'm gonna fucking rip you apart. Naruto threatened as he started fighting to break free, taking his eyes off the man for only a moment, but that was all Orochimaru needed. Forming a hand seal, his neck suddenly lengthened before his head shot forward, biting Naruto on his neck. Retracting his head before Naruto could try to grab onto his neck and attempt to kill him, Orochimaru watched as Naruto suddenly screamed in absolute agony, writhing in tortuous pain as he remained pinned to the ground by the snake's fang. What the fuck did you do to me? Aargh. He. Orochimaru simply chuckled, having found a suitable host he could use after gaining the Sharingan from Sasake. Forming one last hand seal, the man sunk into the ground. A minute or so after he left, Naruto started to instinctually convert his pain into anger, which became strength. Ripping the fang out of him and tossing it aside, Naruto rolled over onto his hands and knees, puking up some of the venom that had gotten in him before snarling like a feral beast as the hole in his stomach healed within seconds, unaware of how Kurama's scarlet chakra began to bubble and boil along his skin, his eyes turning completely blood red in his rage. Feeling a burning sensation as he forced himself to his feet, Naruto clutched at his left hand before hastily taking off his gauntlets and left glove, staring at the image that started forming on the back of his left hand. It was a set of 3 hooked and ragged-looking scythe-shaped markings curving around one another in a makeshift spiral. Little did he know, it was a curse seal called the Hell Seal, counterpart of the Heaven Seal given to Sasake. Arg, fuck. Naruto hissed as the pain spiked for a moment, nearly sending him to his knees. Heading in the direction he assumed his teammates to be in, Naruto put his glove back on, storing his gauntlets in his pouches as he staggered along, the demonic chakra sinking back into his body as he kept moving. He knew he didn't have long before he lost consciousness, just barely managing to stay awake through pure willpower and anger. While still intense, the pain had dulled slightly, his body burning up from whatever it was the man had done to him. Just as he came within sight of his teammates, Naruto started blacking out. Sakura. Wa Naruto. The pink-haired kunoichi called out just as Naruto hit the ground. Setting Sasake down on the ground, she quickly rushed over to her red-haired teammate and although she knew he was immortal, she still checked his vitals. His heart rate was through the roof and he was burning up with an intense fever. Similar symptoms Sasake was suffering from. But the black-haired Uchiha's heart rate wasn't so high. Eyes watering with fear and worry for her 2 teammates, Sakura started lifting Naruto up as best as she could, carrying him over to where Sasake was, forcing herself to stay busy so as not to break down in panic-fueled tears. Please, don't die. I don't want to be alone, please. My head is killing me. Naruto groaned as he sat up, holding his head with one hand. Slowly making his way to his feet, he wobbled a little bit, holding his other arm out for balance. Shit. Feels like my first hangover all over again. He. The chuckle was soft and bit higher pitched than his current level, but Naruto knew that laugh, it was his own. Looking up, he narrowed his eyes upon seeing his younger self. Short and spiky crimson hair that was kept slicked back, his black and red eyes staring back at him with a demented grin on his face. Old and tattered black pants smeared with dirt and blood, a black hoodie over his bare torso, tattered and dirty white cloth wrapped around his feet up to his knees, and metal shackles around his wrists with a meter-long length of chain hanging from either of them. His old look as a kid, back when he first started the academy. He couldn't be no older than 6, maybe 7, from the look of his younger self. You should have just killed them and drank their blood when you had the chance. Naruto stayed quiet as the kid held up his hands, showing off the chains. He knew what the copy of him meant. At 6 years old, a group of Chunin had caught him and imprisoned him, using his newfound immortality to their advantage by beating him day in and day out, taking shifts every 6 hours. It was a month before anyone found out about what had happened to him. By then, he had already managed to trick one of the Chunin into getting too close before biting into his neck and drinking every last drop of blood in his body within seconds. After that, he broke free and killed 2 others in his rage, but before he could get his hands on the 5th of 10 shinobi, the Anbu arrived, restrained him, and arrested the 6 Chunin that had survived. Yeah? Well, their blood tasted like shit. I wouldn't feed on those fuckers even if they were the last source of blood on this planet and I was dying of thirst out in the middle of a fucking desert. You say that now. You were too weak back then. His younger self hissed out, still grinning that irritating grin of his as he reached up with a clawed hand and dug them into the flesh of his face, pulling them down and revealing pale white skin with an amber-slitted eye staring back at him, dark purple markings surrounding it. If only you were faster. If only you were stronger. Just fucking shut up already, would ya? I sick of hearing you run your damn mouth. Naruto snarled as he reared back his right foot before kicking his younger self under the chin, causing its head to snap back so suddenly that it broke the clone's neck in 3 different places while the body sailed up and over, essentially back-flipping before landing on its stomach. NGH. Naruto groaned slightly, a damp cloth on his forehead as he remained motionless in the safe haven of a tree's roots. Unnoticed by the battling occupants of the clearing, black bone-like markings started forming on his skin, traveling up his left arm as he started to stir from his slumber, grimacing slightly. Rolling over onto his hands and knees, Naruto started standing back up, the markings now covering almost the entire left half of his torso alongside his left arm, some of them having risen to cover the left half of his face from his hairline down to the corner of his mouth without any on his jawline, forming an image in the likeness of a fanged skull without a bottom jaw. Holy shit. What the fuck is going on? Naruto, you're awake, Sakura called out, drawing Naruto's attention away from his left hand to the pink-haired kunoichi. She looked in pretty bad shape. Glancing around the clearing and spotting several people from their graduating class back in the academy, Naruto knew none of them had the balls to beat Sakura half to death. That left the ones he didn't know. He was in the middle of contemplating whether to feed on the Otto-genin's blood or not when Sakura spoke up again. Naruto, your body. Huh? Oh, yeah. Naruto grunted and then mumbled out as he looked back down to his left hand, only to wince as he focused on pushing back the strange feeling power that had welled up inside of him. It felt more vile than Kurama's chakra did when he first started using it. He hated that feeling. Little by little, the markings began to fade and retreat to his left arm, soon vanishing under his glove. Once it was completely gone, Naruto smirked and flexed his left hand, only to grunt in confusion when he noticed that Sasake was starting to get up, black flame-like markings forming over his own skin. Scowling and not wanting to deal with the ego trip that would undoubtedly ensue from the Uchiha's power boost, Naruto quickly smashed his fist into the back of Sasake's head, knocking him back out and causing the markings to retreat back into the seal on his neck. Stupid little bastard. I'm not dealing with your shit right now. No, Zaku, don't you realize? Dosu called out to his teammate, snapping Naruto out of his thoughts just in time to notice that one of the 2 Otto-male genin was building up a large amount of chakra. Gathering up his scarlet chakra in his left hand and arm before spinning to his right, swinging his left arm out at Sakura and Sasake just as the Otto-genin released his technique. Zankyokukuha. As the dust began to clear from the massive concentrated blast of air, Zaku smirked and laughed about blowing them away, seeing nothing left behind by his attack. He was confused, however, when someone tapped on his shoulder from behind. Turning to look, he was instantly greeted by a glove's fist that smashed into his face, the knuckle spikes tearing through his nose and cheek as he was knocked off his feet and into the side of a tree. Extending from his left arm was a giant spectral arm of translucent red chakra with Sakura and Sasake held in the hand, Naruto grunted and put his teammates down near the edge of the clearing to keep them out of harm's way, retracting the chakra into his arm a moment later while wincing slightly in pain as the seal on his hand acted up again. Fucking moron. Naruto mumbled before curiously licking some of the blood from the spike strip on his right hand, only to grimace and shudder. Your blood tastes like shit, dude. What the hell is wrong you? NGH. You bastard. Zaku groaned while standing back up, clutching his bleeding face as he glared at the redhead. Completely ignoring him, Naruto glanced down at his fishnet top and grimaced again, the shirt being nothing more than tatters and torn string now. Ripping it off, Naruto ignored Zaku as he held his hands up and charged up another attack. Zankyokukuha. Geez. You're just a regular ol' one-trick pony, ain't ya? Naruto grumbled, letting the attack him full on this time. As the mass of invisible wind blades cut into him and the pressure slammed into his body hard enough to smash him into the trunk of a tree, Naruto didn't make a single sound. As the dust began to settle once more, Naruto slowly stood up while picking up his right arm, which had been cleaved off just above the elbow, and put it back in place, letting his healing factor reattach the limb. Zaku, along with everyone else, could only stare in shock and horror as Naruto reattached his arm so casually, the dozens of bleeding gashes on his body stitching shut and healing without a single scar to show. Wah. But that's impossible. Zaku spat in disbelief. You should be dead, you thick-headed or something. That shit ain't gonna kill me, dumbass. I'm fucking immortal. Naruto grumbled before grinning madly, his eyes shining with bloodlust and insanity as he looked up at the black-haired genin while crimson chakra bubbled and seeped out of his skin, coating his forearms and hands. That was when he threw them forward, causing a pair of translucent limbs of red chakra to shoot forward, the clawed hands reaching out to Zaku. Let me hear you scream. Fuck, Zankuha. Zaku cried as he unleashed another blast of air from his palms, only for the arms to separate and reach around the blast, letting it hit Naruto as they latched onto Zaku's arms. Cackling madly, Naruto clenched his hands into fists, causing the spectral chakra arms to do the same and crush every bone in Zaku's arms from his hands up to his shoulders, the shattered bones stabbing through his flesh and causing blood to pour out from the wounds. Ah erg. Ahahahahahaha. That's the best one I've heard in years. Naruto cackled maniacally, the Auto Genin still caught in his clutches. Pulling his arms out to either side, Naruto's eyes widened with an even greater madness. Do it again. Let me hear that beautiful sound again. Ah-r-r-r-r-g-g-g-h-h-h. Zaku screamed just as loud as before, if not more so, as his mangled arms were ripped out of their sockets, the flesh ripping and tearing around his shoulders while even bits of muscle followed after his crudely amputated limbs. Laughing as insanely as before, Naruto dropped the removed limbs and retracted the chakra arms, his left eye twitching slightly as he locked his gaze on Dosu, ignoring Zaku as he collapsed to the ground and slowly died from severe blood loss and extreme pain. Stop. Just take our scroll and leave us be. Dosu called out while throwing his earth scroll at the feet of the crazed redhead, having already collected to injured kin and supporting her. Naruto simply ignored it as he started walking towards Dosu with a slow, predatory gait. When Dosu turned to flee as best as he could with his teammate, Naruto rushed forward with his clawed hands on either side of him, his mouth open in a feral and mindless grin to reveal his fangs as he surged forward. Just as Dosu's feet left the ground as he jumped towards a low-hanging branch, Naruto slammed into his back, disappearing into the brush with the two remaining Auto Genin. It was only a few seconds before everyone heard the man's scream of agony and terror. A few seconds later, as it went silent, Dosu's body was flung back out into the clearing, smashing into the side of a tree with a sickening series of crunches and snaps from bones breaking, only to hit the ground and go limp without a single drop of blood left in his body to shed. Hee. The dark and menacing chuckle echoed throughout the clearing as Naruto calmly walked back through the bushes and into sight once more, his mouth and chin covered in blood from feeding on the fur-wearing shinobi's blood. Taking a few deep and ragged breaths, Naruto's fanged grin slowly faded away as he calmed down, wiping his face clean of blood before licking it off his hands. Taking one last deep breath to relax fully, Naruto smirked while suddenly looking over his shoulder at the Konoha Genin that remained in the clearing. Anyone else want to play? Team Guy and Team 10 couldn't flee fast enough, both groups of genin thoroughly frightened and disgusted by the redhead's brutal and gruesomely monstrous behavior. Walking over to the scroll Dosu had thrown at him, Naruto picked it up and grinned, tossing it in the air for a moment before catching it and stuffing it in one of his pouches. Walking over to Sakura, who was frozen in place in shock after witnessing such a brutal kill, Naruto knelt down beside her and gently ran the claws of his left hand through her short pink hair, frowning slightly. "What happened to your hair? I thought it looked much better when it was long." Naruto mumbled quietly, mostly thinking out loud as he stared at Sakura's hair, his voice snapping her out of her thoughts. Blushing slightly at the comment despite the trembling and pale face that came with her terror and nausea, Sakura tucked her short bangs behind an ear and gave him an uneasy smile. Catching how her eyes darted over to Zaku's and Dosu's remains, Naruto sighed slightly and gently put his hand on her shoulder, making her snap her eyes over to him, staring into his eyes. Instantly, she could see the faint hints of sadness and heartbreak upon him seeing her so afraid of him. "Don't be scared, Sakura. I won't harm you. Sorry," she mumbled quietly and nervously, looking down at the ground. Sighing, Naruto glanced at Sasake before picking him up and slinging him over his right shoulder, holding a hand out to the pinkhead, making her look up at him in surprise. "Come on, we'll find a new spot to make camp and rest for a bit before heading to the tower. You look like you could use some sleep," Naruto commented calmly, surprising Sakura with the gentleness of his tone. She had never heard him talk like that before and it made her blush faintly a second time as she took his hand and let him help her up to her feet. Before she could protest, Sakura squeaked and blushed fiercely with embarrassment as Naruto wrapped his free left arm around her waist and grinned slightly, only to leap into the trees with both of his teammates in tow. Sitting on the railing backwards and hanging from the steel pipe upside down with his legs wrapped around the support, Naruto kept his hands behind his head, watching the match out of boredom, kind of disappointed from the lack of bloodshed throughout the matches. Sasake beat his chakra-stealing opponent, one of Kabuto's teammates. Shino defeated his by draining the Iwa genin of his chakra with his Kakaichu. Makeup Boy, from Suna, Konkuro, beat his opponent by crushing the body of Kabuto's rubber-limbed teammate, Masumi. While she had put up a pretty good fight, Sakura had been knocked out by Ino, but the stupid blonde-haired Mind Walker had been knocked out, too, so he was proud Sakura had at least taken her opponent down with her. Then, Fangirl, Tamari, had pretty much won her match by swinging that stupid fan of hers and batting aside every last weapon the living armory of a kunoichi, Tenten, had before knocking her out. Currently, Shikamaru was being as lazy as ever, not even bothering to actually hit his opponent by, instead, making the Iwa kunoichi hit her head on the wall behind her. Naruto hummed quietly as he noticed the next pair of names flash into existence on the board in the back of the room, flashing his fangs in a grin as he spotted his name as one of them. "Finally. I thought I was actually gonna die of old age, I was waiting so long. Yahoo lucky." Kiba cheered excitedly before looking to his canine companion, Akamaru, who stood about level with his waist. "We can definitely beat this idiot, Akamaru." Akamaru whined, making Kiba pause and look at his partner. "What do you mean? He smells like that Suna guy." Kiba questioned as he glanced at Naruto as the redhead let go of the railing and fell to the ground, flipping to his feet at the last second. "There's no way he's that tough. We used to kick his ass back in the academy all the time. Besides, it took him 2 years just to graduate. Hee, stupid mutt." Naruto snickered out quietly, referring to Kiba, upon hearing the brash Inuzuka's comment as he walked over to his designated start position for the match. After a minute of waiting, Kiba and Akamaru finally reached their own starting position. "Sure took your sweet time getting down here, bitch. What, did you go into heat and need to let your dog fuck yaw in the ass before yaw could fight? You son of a," Kiba snarled angrily, humiliated by the redhead's comment and insulted by being called a bitch again, as he took a step forward, only for Hayate to hold a hand out to stop him. "I'm going to rip you apart for that, Naruto. Just you wait. I'm sick of waiting. I wanna fight already." Naruto whined childishly, only to suddenly grin maliciously and lean forward, his arms dangling limply at his sides, his eyes vicious and narrowed. "I wanna taste your blood." Akamaru was right. He's just like that Gaara guy. Kiba suddenly thought fearfully as he flinched, recalling what he and his team had witnessed the Suna genin do to that AIM team back in the forest. Glancing between the two genin, Gecko Hayate started the match. Not wanting to give Naruto a chance to react, Kiba formed a hand seal and dropped to his hands and feet, declaring the name of the technique he used as he charged forward, his nails becoming claws as chakra flooded his body. Shikyaku. Gu. Naruto grunted out as the wind was knocked out of him by Kiba's elbow slamming into his gut, sending him flying back from the force and kicking up a cloud of dust and pulverized stone as he hit the wall. Hey, he won't be opening his eyes for a while, Kiba stated calmly and triumphantly as he turned to start walking away, only to stop when he heard a noise behind and look back. Just in time for a giant fist of blood-red chakra to shoot out of the dust cloud and smash into his body and send him flying into the opposite wall. Absorbing the chakra from the attack as he calmly walked out of the dust cloud, Naruto grinned while wiping the slight bit of blood from the corner of his mouth with the back of his left hand. But how? He. You wanna know why it took 2 years for me to graduate from the academy and why you and everyone else had an easy time smacking me around during taijutsu lessons? Naruto inquired, talking loud enough for the Inuzuka and everyone else in the arena to hear him. Well, my chakra control sucked ass and I ain't gonna lie, it still does compared to the rest of y'all. As for the spars back in the academy? The Hokage forbid me from actually fighting any of y'all, cuz he knew I'd kill y'all, without any hesitation. Lucky for y'all, I've gotten a good enough control over myself that I don't just instinctually kill people that threaten me anymore. Monster. Kiba grunted out while climbing back to his feet, Orochimaru having backed out of the fight, too afraid of Naruto to fight him. Naruto quirked an eyebrow and cocked his head to the side at the name, only to grin viciously again, revealing all 4 of his long canine fangs and couple other pointed teeth in his mouth. Monster, Yeah, I guess y'all could say that. Naruto commented as his hands and forearms were coated in Kurama's red chakra again. But I prefer demon, it suits me better, y'all, no? Now, let's see just how tough a job it'll be to crack that thick skull of yours. Hyaku Yoko Ashi. Gua was the only sound Kiba could make before Naruto's arms blurred with movement, spectral arms of red chakra smashing him deeper into the wall with every punch at unrealistic speeds. Cocking his right hand back, Naruto's eyes blazed with malicious insanity before lashing out with one last punch, smashing Kiba through the wall completely and into the one beyond it. Retracting the spectral limb and reabsorbing the chakra, Naruto waited for the verdict with an eager smirk as Hayate ran to check on Kiba. Winner. Uzumaki Naruto. The Chunin declared before calling for a team of medics, who came rushing out to help the bloodied, broken, and bruised Inuzuka heir. While walking back up the stairs to the balcony, Naruto licked some of the blood on the spike strip, having caught Kiba's arm when the Inuzuka hit him. It wasn't too bad, but it wasn't that great either. Reaching up and pulling a dog hair off his tongue, Naruto grimaced with disgust and wiped it up on the rail before continuing to where his team was getting back in his previous position of hanging over the guard rail. He had a feeling that the other matches were going to be boring like the others. Neji, this match is over, Hayate declared, but Neji ignored him as he continued on his charge, intending to end Hinata's life with his next strike. However, just before he could take another step, a massive clawed fist wrapped around his body, restraining him from moving at all, just as the Konoha Chunin in the arena surrounded him to stop the Hyuga. Of all people to glare at, Neji looked over his shoulder at Naruto, who stared at him with a cold, apathetic stare as he hung from his spot on the railing. The proctor called the match, moron. Naruto commented calmly, but his words were like ice as he slowly retracted the chakra arm and assimilated the chakra once more. Dropping from the railing when Hinata coughed up blood and collapsed, Naruto ran over to her and knelt down beside her, placing his hand against the left side of her chest, his eyes closed. Her heart is beating erratically, it's irregular too. Naruto, what are you doing? Kakashi asked of his student with caution. Naruto didn't move from his spot as red chakra formed over his right hand, his left forming a seal in front of him. Stabilizing her heart before it gives out on her, Naruto mumbled softly as he bit his thumb to draw blood and holding it to Hinata's mouth, causing a few drops to fall into her mouth before his thumb healed. Jujutsu. Maketsu Keshi. Naruto, what are you? Kakashi cut himself short when Naruto suddenly turned to the side a moment later and dropped to his hands and knees, coughing up blood while clutching at his chest with one hand. Simultaneously, color started to return to Hinata's face just as the medic team arrived to take over. As he coughed up another glob of blood, the head medic in the squad checked her vitals, glancing over at Naruto cautiously and suspiciously. "What's her condition?" Kurenai asked worriedly, getting a brief glance from the man before he glanced back over at Naruto, who was still coughing up copious amounts of blood, his claws digging into his chest from the pain in his heart. "Whatever it is he did, it helped. She's not out of the woods yet, but she'll survive," the man commented before he and the other medics loaded Hinata onto a stretcher and rushed her to the emergency medical room in the tower's clinic. "Hey, demon, here's some advice. Stay out of clan matters next time. You'll live longer that way," Neji stated condescendingly, making Naruto scowl as he spit out the last bit of blood that came out of his system. After a few more moments, Naruto gasped for breath, his body drenched in sweat as blood dripped from his lips. Slowly getting back to his feet, Naruto wiped his mouth clean with the back of his left hand before glaring at Neji. Glancing down at the blood Hinata had coughed up earlier, Naruto knelt down and covered his right hand in it, clenching it into a fist as he held it out in Neji's direction. "On her blood and my own," Naruto hissed quietly and coldly, his claws digging into his palm hard enough to draw his blood. "I curse you and vow that I'll crush you the next chance I get, Hyuga Neji." HMPH. Neji scoffed while turning to walk away, never noticing the hellish fury burning in Naruto's eyes. He had never taken the time to actually get to know Hinata, having not even known her name until the day they took the graduation exam together. But Naruto still remembered how she had been so kind and gentle to everyone around her, putting others before herself. For her own cousin to try to kill her, he was going to make him suffer for his crime. Not even Naruto was so monstrous as to crush the spirit of such a kind family member so cruelly before attempting to kill them. With almost every last technique he knew requiring blood, he had formed a personal code of honor around that same vermilion liquid. Having technically bound his honor to Hinata with his blood, he would not let Neji's actions go unpunished. Naruto, Sakura thought worriedly, knowing that Naruto would keep his word. She just didn't know if he would contain that murderous drive to the Chunin exams. Lee was worried as well, but only because he hadn't been awake to see Naruto's rampage against the Auto Genin. Even after Naruto's show of power against Kiba, Lee still felt that Neji was beyond Naruto's level. "Geez. I kinda feel sorry for that Neji guy, pissing off that dude like that." Kankuro mused quietly, Gaara having told them earlier that the red-haired Konoha Genin was like him. Thinking of that, he glanced between Gaara, Naruto, and Neji, a little unsettled by the presence of so many monsters. That's when they all saw the next two names flicker to life on the board mounted to the back wall. Rock Lee versus Gaara. He. You're going down, Neji. Naruto mumbled under his breath with a vicious grin as he sat on the lone balcony attached to his apartment, night having fallen just a few hours ago. It was the second night after the preliminary matches and the tournament matchups had been assigned before they were dismissed. Among those that passed, Naruto was interested only in fight Neji and Gaara. A part of him wondered what Sasake would be able to do against him, but he had a feeling the brat wouldn't beat his opponent in the tournament, Gaara. Come back to bed, master. I'm cold. Kurama mumbled sleepily as she leaned against him from behind, wrapping her arms around the shirtless red head and rubbing her cheek against the back of his shoulder, enjoying the intense warmth he always gave off. Smiling softly as he looked over his shoulder, Naruto gently kissed the top of her head before getting off the railing and leading her back to the bed. Clad in only a pair of extremely short black spandex shorts and one of her light gray tank tops, Kurama slipped back into the bed with her former container before snuggling up against his side and resting her head on his chest, her breathing soon evening back out as she seemingly fell back asleep. She looks so peaceful like this, he mused with another small, genuine smile as he gently brushed her hair out of her face with one hand. Grimacing slightly and letting out a soft groan at the contact, Kurama cuddled closer, nuzzling his chest slightly before going still once more. Shortly after returning from the Forest of Death, Naruto had released the slave seal on Kurama's abdomen, only to have the woman practically beg him to put it back on by the time night came, saying that she didn't feel right without it. She had still acted the same as before, only she didn't address him as master anymore. Amongst the arguing, he had discovered the real reason. She had grown fond of being his slave, and had actually come to love him as her master. Not as a lover or boyfriend or husband or anything of the sort. As her master. Suffice to say, he had been shocked to the core by that piece of information. Still, Kurama had been adamant in her desire to have the seal placed on her again, especially after her two little secrets had been exposed. While he wasn't exactly eager to enslave her again, Naruto couldn't deny her the one thing that would keep her truly happy. She had shocked him yet again shortly after he put the seal back on her when she made it known that she wouldn't mind if their relationship progressed to one that was more physical and intimate. He still hadn't quite wrapped his head around that one. Sighing slightly and clearing his mind, he closed his eyes in order to go to sleep. Naruto grumbled under his breath as he continued staring at the charts and scrolls of various seal arrays, most of them coming from the ones on his stomach that contained Kurama's chakra and kept their spirits bound together. He was trying to figure out how to tweak the seal in order to gain more access to Kurama's chakra other than just one tail, hoping to access at least a second or possibly a third tail and control them by the time the month was over. Sitting beside him and leaning into his side was Kurama, who had volunteered to help him out. He had been at it all day and had made no headway in his endeavors. "So, you're saying that I need the key or whatever it is to unlock the seal completely before I can access any more of your chakra without completely losing my mind or whatever?" "Yeah, that's the only solution I can come up with," Kurama responded, her head propped against Naruto's right shoulder with his arm wrapped around her waist. "Even with my permission, my will is still bound to my chakra, so you run a very high risk of losing control and going on a rampage, even if you don't want to. The Hake no Fuin Shiki and the Shiki Fujin merely keeps me bound to you, meaning if you died, my spirit would go with yours into the Shinigami's stomach, but with your immortality jujutsu, it's a moot point. The two Shisho Fuin around it are the tricky ones, letting only a. You said the two Shisho Fuin allow only a set amount of your chakra pass through." Naruto mumbled while placing a detailed illustration of the aforementioned seal in front of him, looking it over. "Would it be possible to mess with those particular seals to allow more of your chakra through without needing the key?" "Those are the parts that needs the key, Naruto-sama. The key works in two parts. 1. It opens the gate completely, essentially freeing all of my chakra for you to access, but it also releases me from imprisonment. Or at least it would have," Kurama explained, referring to her new body in the end. "The second part affects the seal as a whole, giving you the ability to manipulate it freely at your discretion with no limitations or problems that I know of." "Damn," Naruto hissed in complaint, only for Kurama to gently cup his cheek and turn his head towards her, kissing him gently. "Come on, let's go to bed. It's late," Kurama urged as she grabbed Naruto's hand and pulled him up, leading him to the bedroom. Sighing, Naruto reluctantly followed, wishing he could keep working on the seal. Noticing his reluctance, Kurama smirked faintly with a seductive touch, letting go of his hand and stepping away from him while facing him. "Don't you want me, master?" Naruto froze in place, staring at the red-haired woman in shock as he watched her reach up and slowly pull down the zipper to her hoodie, giving him a beguiling smirk the whole time. When she stopped just before the zipper was undone all the way, Naruto noticed how she hadn't worn a bra that day and that her usual mesh top was missing, leaving almost every last bit of skin on her upper body uncovered, save for the hoodie. She had already been planning this. "Kurama, you, she hummed out as she slowly walked up to him, pressing her plump chest against his body while looking up into his eyes, her hands slowly sliding up his sides before wrapping her arms around his neck and shoulders. "You already have my soul, chakra, and my heart. Tonight, you will own every part of me, including my body. Are you, you're sure about this?" Naruto asked a bit uncertainly, blushing slightly, but not because of the intimacy or Kurama's close promixity. It was more along the lines of him having not expected her to want their relationship to move so fast. Kurama's smirk grew before she pressed her lips to his. He lost all hesitation instantly. He. I love this technique," she muttered under her breath while looking herself over in the mirror. She had originally made it back when she was just a kid, but it used to be just a normal henge. However, like she had been doing over the past few years, she had been converting a number of normal ninjutsu techniques into jujutsu techniques. Thus, the basic henge became jujutsu, sekusu shinboru. Unlike normal henge, her sekusu shinboru technique made the form entirely real, all the way down to flesh and blood and bone. Oh, yeah, this is gonna be fun. She stood at 5 feet 6 inches with long shaggy dark crimson hair that trailed down to the middle of her thighs in a low ponytail with a lithe and voluptuous hourglass figure, naturally occurring blood-red eyeshadow decorating her red and black eyes. Her slightly pointed finger-nails a dark and bloody shade of crimson. Black cloth bindings wrapped around her chest barely contained her large F-cup S, while a pair of baggy black and dark red camouflage pants that were far too big on her hung loose on her broad hips, slipping off the side of one slightly despite the black leather belt she wore to keep them up. Having disposed of her usual gloves and boots for this specific occasion, she went with simply black leather fingerless gloves on her hands and wooden geta on her feet. Sliding her hands down her sides from either side of her chest down to her hips, Naruko smirked before exiting her apartment, having planned a little day-off venture for her and Kurama after what happened between them last night. Can't wait to see your reaction, Naruko mumbled under her breath in excitement as she made her way to the hot springs, a smirk on her red-painted lips being a cross between sultry and fiendish. She barely kept herself from laughing at the reactions of the male populace, many of them drooling over her body with many of them getting in trouble with their wives or girlfriends. What intrigued her was the surprising number of women that were lusting after her. She just might have to pay a visit to a few of the female-only bars with Kurama and get a third party involved one night. Scarcely known was the fact that Naruko was a pervert and a very talented one, at that, in many different ways. That and currently the biggest one in all of Konoha, known in the underground as the Red Queen. The bloody Red Queen to her enemies. The reason no one knew was because he was never caught, having always used his oiroke and then later his sekusu shinboru techniques to disguise himself as a woman. That and he usually flattered the women too much for any of them to get mad at him in the end or anything. After finding out that his sekusu shinboru technique turned him into an actual woman, Naruto had run a few tests and was relieved to find out that her new body did not come with a menstrual cycle. Thus she was entirely sterile in this form. Not like she'd let a man touch her to begin with, but still, it was always better to be safe than sorry. Spotting Kurama just outside the hot springs, Naruko snuck up behind the woman while she wasn't paying attention, smirking fiendishly again. Slipping her arms around Kurama's waist and one hand under her top, Naruko cupped one of her ass while sucking on the taller red-haired woman's neck, her other hand moving to Kurama's left thigh and sliding up her leg. In less than a handful of seconds, Kurama was breathing heavily, her cheeks burning fiercely with a blend of embarrassment, excitement, and anxious anticipation. Just as the tips of Naruko's fingers slipped under the waistband of Kurama's spandex shorts under her skirt, however, Naruko suddenly pulled away, making Kurama whine softly and complain and lean against the nearby wall as her legs wobbled and threatened to give out from under her. Turning around, Kurama's blush grew even worse when she saw that her master was now, technically, her mistress. Naruko smirked seductively and licked her lips slightly as she glanced over Kurama's figure for the 1000th time since they moved to the next level in their relationship, as it were. Kurama blushed even worse as she started getting timid and self-conscious. It excited her to no end, but being stared at like a piece of meat dangled in front of a hungry wolf was still new to her. Walking up to Kurama until their chests were touching slightly, Naruko grinned and placed her hand on Kurama's hip, turning her towards the hot spring in trance, her hand slipping under her ankle-length skirt through the slit running up the side and gripped her rear. "Come on, Kurama-heim. I reserved a private onsen for us ahead of time. Hi, mistress." Kurama stuttered out, barely able to think straight anymore with her master's ally mischievous behavior. Still, she had been the one that gave him permission to do whatever he wanted with her last night. She mentally groaned at that, knowing that she had cursed herself in that moment. Then again, pleasuring and being d by her mistress for the rest of her life wasn't so bad. Hee. Naruko froze at the sound. She knew that sound. It was the hushed excited giggling of a perverted man. Slowly looking over her shoulder with a twitching eyebrow, Naruko spotted the white-haired man and growled quietly. The women's hot springs were her territory. All the perverts in Konoha knew that. None dared defy the bloody Red Queen. Slowly removing her hand from under Kurama's skirt, Naruko calmly walked up behind the kabuki-dressed man and backed up a couple steps. Just as the man looked over his shoulder, Naruko had already gained a running start, her right foot cocked back and already in mid-kick. Pervert. Ah! Came the girlish squeal of pain a moment later as the man was sent over the wall in front him after being kicked in the nuts from behind hard enough to break a concrete block. Snorting as she dusted her hands off, Naruko ignored the screaming man as he was thrown back over the wall a few moments later by the very same women he had been peeping on, landing in the boiling hot waters that fed the bathhouses. Just as she reached Kurama, Naruko glanced over her shoulder as the man, skin as red as a freshly cooked lobster's, finally clambered out of the canal and glared at her. "You want another, bitch?" she growled while narrowing her eyes and cocking her right foot back slightly, making the man instantly curl into a ball and start whimpering. Huffing, Naruko tucked her bangs behind an ear and led Kurama into the bathhouse. Hand once more firmly planted on the former, current Kyuubi's rear. "Ah, Jeriah, you're back," Hiruzen greeted cheerfully before frowning when he noticed the man's state. "What happened to you? A crazy red-headed chick with creepy red and black eyes is what?" Jeriah grunted out, still holding his horribly abused tentacles as he slowly sat down in a chair in front of his old teacher's desk. The Sandaime groaned slightly, knowing who his student was talking about. "Geez. She kicks almost as hard as Tsunade Hime. I see you met him, then." Sarutobi Hiruzen commented, getting a confused look amidst painful winces from Jeriah. Signaling one of his Anbu guards, he issued orders. "Neko, please go get Naruko for me." "Hi, Hokage-sama," the purple-haired woman acknowledged before vanishing via Shunshin. "Who the hell are you talking about? It wasn't a guy. I was attacked by a girl, sensei." Jeriah argued, only to wince again. A few moments later, before Hiruzen could respond, Neko returned and she looked rather nervous. She was fidgeting a little bit, too. "They'll be here soon, Hokage-sama," Neko informed before disappearing one last time. Quirking an eyebrow, Hiruzen refrained from making an inquiry about her behavior. With Naruto, there was no telling what the poor woman might have just walked into. A few minutes later, a sudden burst of crimson flames flared to life in the middle of the room, revealing Naruko and Kurama in the Jashinist's personal, Goka, Shunshin. "You again?" Naruko and Jeriah cried out at the same time, both pointing at each other with expressions of fear, Jeriah, and anger, Naruko. Although he had seen it several times before in the past, Sarutobi Hiruzen couldn't stop himself from blushing and looking away from Naruko. "Damn it, Naruto. Get rid of the henge," the Sandaime grumbled, refusing to look at the girl. Grumbling under her breath with a pout, Naruko formed a singed handseal, wreathing her frame in smoke before returning to her true form. Almost instantly, Jeriah went green in the face upon realizing that the girl he had thought to be almost as gorgeous as Tsunade was really a guy. "Jeriah, meet Naruto." "Naruto, this is Jeriah, my old student." "Yeah, we met," Naruto growled, glaring at the man. "What the fuck is this about, old man? I was busy." "Why, you're a dude," Jeriah mumbled out, getting a flat look from Naruto. "How many times do I have to tell you to stop using that accursed disguise?" Hiruzen sighed heavily, making Naruto shrug. "It's not normal for a man to willingly disguise himself as a woman like you do." "I don't know. You could say it every second of your life from start to finish and I still won't listen." "And who the fuck said I was normal?" Naruto responded as he scratched his neck nonchalantly. "Besides, it's too much fun. I get to beat the shit out of men that get handsy, and I get to fuck lesbians whenever I want. What's not to like about it? You lucky little." Jeriah grumbled under his breath while glaring at the red-haired genin, only to start pouting in a corner in depression as he traced images on the ground with his finger. "I want to sleep with lesbians, too." "Yeah. Can I kick him again?" Naruto asked while staring at the white-haired pervert, getting a disgruntled, "No," from the Hokage. "Master, please behave yourself," Kurama urged softly from behind Naruto, making him sigh. Simultaneously, Jeriah's head turned so fast, the room's occupants swore he had broken his neck. "A slave girl, too? Why can't I get that lucky?" Jeriah cried from his spot in the corner. "Maybe because you're an old, overgrown man-child?" Naruto suggested, innocently, while tilting his head to the side, purposefully sending Jeriah into an even deeper depression. Hiruzen could only sigh in frustration and bury his face in his hands. This was going to be a long meeting. Damn, I'm out of aspirin, too. Hiruzen mentally cursed as he checked one of his desk drawers. Not long after, Naruto was leaving the administration building with Kurama following after him. Fucking old man, stickin' me with that fucking lech. I better not catch him near the women's bathhouses again. Naruto growled under his breath in anger, mockingly repeating Jiraiya's words. You need to learn to control the Kyuubi's chakra, stupid fuck. I've already figured that one out. Master, please calm down. Kurama stated softly, though she smiled warmly. She knew he was only mad at the Toad Sage because he had invaded Naruto's territory back at the hot springs. Recalling what they had been doing while back at the onsen, Kurama blushed heavily, but leaned in close to whisper into Naruto's ear. You know, Master, we never did get to finish what we were doing. Naruto froze mid-step, his mind instantly switching gears. A moment later, Kurama found an arm around her waist before they vanished via Naruto's Goku Shunshin for a second time that day. What's on the agenda for today, Fairy? Naruto greeted with a yawn as he approached Jeriah, who glared at the redhead. They had been training for only 3 days and Jeriah had learned the hard way that Naruto had indeed figured out how to control the Kyuubi's chakra. By being embedded in the side of a cliff by a giant fist of red chakra. Stop calling me that, you little shit. Jeriah bellowed furiously, only for Naruto to stare at him calmly, flip him off, and kick him in the shin just for the hell of it. Ow, god damn it, you insufferable little bastard. Yeah, that's what people keep calling me. Naruto muttered casually while cleaning his ear with his pinky, ignoring the irate Sennin's hateful glare. Come on, already. I want to get back to Kurama. She's been a bit feisty the last couple days and I don't want to pass up any chances. Hee. Jeriah, giggling, began scribbling furiously into his notepad. Naruto gave him a flat look before red chakra covered his right fist, only to punch the sage full on with another giant fist of red chakra. I thought it was impossible. Naruto mumbled while withdrawing the chakra back into his body. Dude's got a skull thicker than mine. OWWWW. Jeriah groaned pitifully from his spot, slowly falling forward out of the hole his body had left in the rock. He alive, unfortunately. Naruto mumbled before walking away, sticking his hands in his pockets as he made his way to a nearby training field. They're toads, not frogs. Jeriah argued, once again baited by his red-haired student. Toad, frog, same fucking thing. Naruto responded with an incredulous look. I still don't think they'll be of any help in a fight. What the fuck are they gonna do? Croak at the enemy until they get pissed off and just leave? Why you stupid brat. Toad summons are one of the most versatile kinds of summons you can find. Jeriah spat through gnashed teeth, glaring at the redhead. If anyone walked by and saw them at that moment, it would seem rather comical with how easily Naruto, as calm as ever, was pissing off the white-haired man. Look, if it ain't got claws or fangs, I don't want nothing to do with it. Simple as that, Naruto retorted. Hell, I'd take cat summons over a bunch of frogs and I hate cats. At least they can bite and scratch. I know, I've suffered their wrath before. And what if you encounter someone that can summon animals? What then, smart ass? Jeriah tried arguing, thinking he had just won the dispute. Same thing I always do when faced with something bigger than me. Naruto remarked. I kill it. Oh, yeah? Well, how the hell are you going to do that? The Toad Sage inquired, only to be punched with another giant fist of red chakra. Like that, Naruto answered casually, acting as if he hadn't just sent his sensei through a tree for the 100th time in the past week. Hearing Jeriah groan in pain, Naruto rolled his eyes. Oh, quit bitching. I didn't hit you that hard. Shut up, brat. You get sent through a tree every day for a week and we'll see how you feel afterwards. Jiraiya spat as he dragged himself back to his feet, only to watch as Naruto took a kunai and drove it into the side of his own skull, giving the man a flat stare the entire time. Good point. Really creepy, but good point. Look, I'm tired of arguing. Let's just keep working on making me stronger and faster for right now. I've already got my bases covered when it comes to mass destruction and mass distraction. Naruto sighed out and explained as he removed the kunai from his head, getting a look of curious confusion from Jeriah about the last part. Smirking since he knew he had the man right where he wanted him, Naruto created a small army of cage bunshin, all of them forming a handseal. Jujutsu. Sekusu Shinboru Harimu. Ga. Jeriah exclaimed as he was sent flying back by a nosebleed from hell upon seeing so many of the nude red-headed females with only wisps of smoke covering their bodies. Dispelling all of his clones and laughing his ass off, Naruto soon found it very difficult to breathe, unable to believe his trap had actually worked. After finally calming down and catching his breath, Naruto noticed that there was still no sign of Jeriah. Getting worried that he might have made his teacher bleed to death with that last one, Naruto slowly looked over the bushes Jeriah had landed behind. Only to receive a kick to the face. "Ow, I think you broke my nose." Naruto groaned as blush gushed down his face, barely able to see due to the tears that welled up in his eyes from the blow. "You fucking." He trailed off for a moment as he cocked back his right chakra-covered fist, only to send Jeriah flying with another punch. Finally, something fucking useful. Naruto grumbled under his breath, poring over the Fuinjutsu scrolls Jeriah had given him to study in his spare time. 2 weeks into their training with just under 2 weeks left in the month, and Jeriah finally managed to find something that Naruto didn't argue with him about. Or put him into a wall over, Fuinjutsu. It had taken Naruto a few days of playing dumb and dropping a good number of obvious hints and clues, but he had finally managed to get Jeriah to help him figure out how to tweak the Shisho Fuin seals. However, Jeriah wasn't really helping him at all, mostly just giving him fractured pieces of what was actually the key, and letting him fend for himself while the Sennin went off to peep on girls. Mindful to avoid the women's hot springs this time, lest he get kicked in the nuts by the redhead again. Shit, this is harder to figure out than reversing gravity. Naruto grumbled under his breath, spotting several large gaps in the seal's design. Obviously, Jeriah didn't want him to accidentally unleash the Kyuubi on Konoha. Sighing heavily, Naruto started examining those same spaces and the context runes around them. After nearly an hour, though, he noticed something. The empty spots were target seals. Shuffling through his papers and scrolls that contained everything he had on the seals staining the flesh of his abdomen, Naruto started looking through them in an effort to reverse engineer the missing spaces by finding the right combination of contextual seal runes that would let him locate the specified targets. Gotcha now, fucker. I'm so kicking Jeriah's ass the next chance I get. Kurama, lying on the bed while watching her lover and master continue working on the seals, could only smile faintly. It had been some time since she had seen him so focused on anything before. She honestly wondered if he could fully master her chakra. Of course, she's not going to just let him take control of it. She'll give him her own little test for it when the time comes, but for now, she'll let him work. Glancing at the clock, Kurama smirked faintly. Only a couple more hours before she could distract him from his work for the night. I never thought I'd fall for a human. Or willingly allow myself to be enslaved by said human. Still, he's such a wonderful specimen. Kurama tilted her head to the side slightly with a smirk on her lips, staring at Naruto's bare torso as he kept working. Damn it, Naruto hissed as he dropped to his hands and knees, breathing heavily and sweating. Only a week away from the final portion of the Chunin exams, and Naruto had yet to leave the seal-covered underground room he had locked himself in 4 days ago, the barrier and containment seals keeping his current training a secret from everyone. I can get the second tail, but I can't hold it any longer than 5 minutes before the seal kicks in again. Fuck. Calm down, Naruto-sama. Kurama urged as she knelt down beside Naruto, handing him a bottle of water while using a hand towel to wipe the sweat from his face. He had been pushing himself far harder than she had ever seen him do before. For some reason, Jeriah's lack of assistance had spurned something in him that made him almost restless and impatient to gain control of her chakra. The only reason he was even able to train like he was doing was because of his immortality and unnaturally powerful healing factor from having her chakra flowing through his body at all times. If it weren't for those two things, he would have killed himself by now between the sheer stress his body was being put through and her chakra being unfit for mortal use. Just relax, okay? Take pride in the fact you were even able to draw on 2 tails worth of chakra to begin with, let alone hold them for so long without losing control of yourself in the slightest. HMPH. Naruto huffed with irritation as he sat down and leaned back slightly, propping himself on one arm as he took another drink of water. They sat in silence for a few minutes before Naruto glanced at the red-haired woman beside him, a thought occurring to him. Hey, Kurama? If I ended up gaining all of your chakra, would you cease to exist? Kurama paused at that, frowning slightly as she stared down at the ground. She knew he had meant die, but didn't want to say it like that. While he was immortal, Naruto still had issues about death. Not about him, but about those he had grown attached to. I don't know, Naruto-kun. I honestly don't. Naruto fell silent after that, staring at the wall across from him as he sat up, hiding his hand from Kurama's sight as it started shaking slightly. He didn't know what he would do if he lost her.
That's all for now. If you enjoy this video, then please like, share and do comments.